Morning and welcome to this meeting of the Strategic Policing Crime Board on Tuesday, 26th September at 10:30 a.m. My name is Simon Foster and I'm the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. I am joined, or will be joined this morning, by members of the board, the Chief Constable, Acting Assistant Chief Constable, police officers and staff, the Director of the Violence Reduction Partnership, the VRP partners, and representatives from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We have times as ever attached to the agenda items, and I'll be having regard to these in the interest of an effective and efficient meeting and to ensure that we're able to conduct the business of the meeting within the time allocated to us. If during the course of the meeting people wish to contribute, then please raise your hand and I'll bring you into the meeting as soon as I'm able to do so. Before we start the formal part of the agenda, I want to pay tribute to Sergeant Paul Freer, who tragically lost his life last week. Sergeant Paul Freer committed his working life to serving the people of the West Midlands. He was a dedicated and popular member of the force throughout his 21 years of service. My thoughts and those of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner are with his family and friends. Agenda item 1 is apologies and Police and Crime Commissioner update, and we have apologies from the Deputy Chief Constable. Do we have any other apologies to be provided this morning? I don't see anybody indicating, so we'll record those apologies that have been given prior to the meeting. Thank you. I have 5 matters in relation to my Police and Crime Commissioner update this morning. Firstly, on the 16th of August 2023, His Majesty's Inspector of the Constabulary published an inspection report on West Midlands Police custody facilities. I take the contents of this report extremely seriously, and I have in particular noted the 4 causes for concern relating to leadership, detainee risk, meeting legal requirements and guidance, and use of force. It's essential that West Midlands Police has custody facilities that provide a safe and secure environment for people properly detained by the police. That's necessary to ensure trust and confidence in our policing service and the wider criminal justice system. And I'll be holding West Midlands Police to account to ensure that immediate action is taken and continues to be taken to remedy these causes for concern as a matter of urgency. Secondly, on the 18th of September, the House of Lords voted by 133 to 125 to retain a democratically elected and directly accountable Police and Crime Commissioner in May 2024. That was a victory for democracy in the West Midlands. I believe in the need for a democratically elected West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner directly accountable to the people, the importance of the people having an opportunity to exercise their choice as to who represents them, and that power should remain with the people. The government and the mayor are attempting to achieve through the back door what they've been incapable of achieving through the ballot box. It's a matter of serious concern that in 2023 we have a government and a mayor that are prepared so casually and cynically to dispense with the fundamental democratic rights of the people of the West Midlands. I'll continue to oppose any steps on the part of the government and the mayor to abolish the people's right to vote for a democratically elected and directly accountable Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands, so that the people of the West Midlands can decide for themselves who they want to represent them as their Police and Crime Commissioner. Thirdly, in 2019, a document titled Saving Lives and Supporting Drug Treatment, making the West Midlands the leading region for naloxone provision, was published. It received widespread support from public sector bodies, including West Midlands Police. West Midlands Police have been playing a leading national role in the carriage of naloxone by frontline police officers. There were about 260 officers voluntarily carrying naloxone. On the 27th of July, the Chief Constable took the decision to instruct officers that they are no longer authorised to carry naloxone. I do not agree with that decision. However, today is not the day to debate the merits or otherwise of that decision. I agree with the recommendation of the All-Party Home Affairs Select Committee that naloxone can be crucial in providing life-saving treatment for opioid-related overdoses, and we need to establish a national naloxone programme to ensure all police forces are able to provide this treatment, including West Midlands Police. The Chief Constable and I are seeking to resolve matters, and a review is taking place. And it's important to acknowledge that the carriage of naloxone is not only a matter for frontline police officers. There must be a collective and collaborative approach amongst all partners. That is why I'll be convening a meeting with partners with a view to recommitting the West Midlands to being the leading region for naloxone provision. Fourthly, I welcome the introduction of a new victim strategy by West Midlands Police to improve the service it provides to victims of crime and to ensure compliance with the Victims Code. Bearing in mind that the Victims Code has been in existence for 18 years, since 2005, there is no conceivable excuse that West Midlands Police or any other criminal justice agency could have for not being fully compliant with the code. The rights and welfare of victims, as set out in the Victims Code, must always be at the forefront of the service provided by West Midlands Police and the wider criminal justice system. It's absolutely essential that West Midlands Police and the wider criminal justice system comply with the Victims Code at all times. There's no excuse for not doing so. Finally, on the 21st of August, I launched a survey asking people to share their experiences of policing. We need a police service that is effective at preventing, tackling and reducing crime, and that aims to advance fairness, diversity, equality and builds trust and confidence between all people and communities and West Midlands Police. I want to hear from people about their experiences of policing so that we can take the action necessary to deliver change and improvement. By participating in this survey, people will be contributing to creating a diverse, equal, fair and inclusive police force that serves the interests and needs of all the people and communities of the West Midlands. The survey can be accessed via the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner website. Please complete the survey and have your say. It'll take about 10 minutes and the closing date is the 29th of September. Agenda item 2 is notes of the last meeting on Tuesday, 25th of July, 2023. Are there any matters arising from the notes of the last meeting? If not, then they are agreed. Agenda item 3 is questions from members of the public. We don't have any questions from members of the public today. Agenda item 4 is questions from members of the board, and we have 5 questions from members of the board. There are 3 questions from Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner Tom McNeill, 1 question from board member Hinda Garple, and the final question will be from me. So can you please ask your first question, Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner?
Thanks, Commissioner, and good morning, Chief and everybody else. In light of recent dog attacks on people, including in the West Midlands, does West Midlands Police think the right regulatory framework is in place to prevent more dangerous incidents? For instance, is the regulation of owners of potentially dangerous breeds sufficient? Or separate to that, is there a view on whether certain dog types that are not currently unlawful should be banned?
So you're absolutely right with the national reports and some local instances that have happened, particularly over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I welcome the sort of movement towards some rapid evidence being collected by government. It's government who are the lawmakers, and obviously we will participate in that. We have a national lead who's Chief Constable Rob Carden, who works with the Home Office on these matters. And from a West Mids perspective, we are ready to assist in any way we can. Operationally, we've got a good team of experts that work across the piece, across the force area, and we have a good level of cooperation, let's say, with our partner agencies. We have some secure kennels. We will go and respond to these incidents. But I think some of the tenets that you've mentioned, and I think the question gets at, are absolutely right. So ownership, types of breed, and then the responsibility side of things. You know, being a dog owner, I have some sympathy with regards to certain individuals who are good, careful owners of pets and who take reasonable steps and reasonable care. But as we've seen from some of these instances that have occurred here and elsewhere, not every owner would perhaps espouse some of those virtues, let's say. So I think it's important that we respond to the evidence and that we support the national work. Operationally, we've got a good team of people that if one of these incidents is reported, we have a decent response in place. We have some secure kenneling to deal with those other issues that come as a result of the court process.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chief. Just a quick follow-up, and it's a genuine question. really don't even have a preconceived notion about what the right answer is at all. Obviously, any additional rules governing the regulation of owners you'd always want there to potentially be additional resources as well, because if there's more requirements on the police, it needs to be some acknowledgement of that. So recognising that part, are people sensibly advocating that owning certain types of dogs might require a licence of some kind, or are there any particular ideas that are being floated around the regulation of owners?
I think the main thing that has been discussed at the moment, there's Chiefs Council this week actually, and I may find out some more. But the main thing that's been discussed is the breed approach. But again, there's some complications with that because you need an expert to determine the breed before obviously the court would take that into consideration. So I think that's the main focus rather than the licensing side of things. But if that changes, obviously I'll communicate back to yourselves.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Would you like to ask your second question, Tom?
Thanks, Commissioner. When car theft started getting out of control in the West Midlands, we kind of continuously called for a specialist task force to get a grip, and West Midlands Police delivered that. And we know that it led to hundreds of arrests and a real coordinated effort, fair bit of success. But we also know that car theft is still extremely high. Can the Chief Constable provide an update on how West Midlands Police are clamping down on this issue?
Yeah, that big operation is called Operation Seclusion, and we've continued to work on the back of that. And you've seen a lot of the media reports around the chop shop approach that we've been doing. Since April, numbers have been reducing, and I think last month was one of our lowest months for 2 years for volumes of car theft. And also in July, we saw the highest arrest rate that we've had in the last 3 years. So I'm very pleased about that. Last weekend, we managed to charge somebody with a conspiracy to steal from 55 vehicles. So we're absolutely pushing it on a local basis. And I think a local approach to policing where we are more in tune with who the local offenders are and working together, response, neighbourhood investigation, has a much better opportunity of focusing down on those types of offences. So at the moment, we're at the lowest we've been for a couple of years. We've got the highest charge rate we've been for 3 years, but we're definitely not sitting on our laurels because those numbers, remain high.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And in loads of different community meetings, this is coming up, and we ourselves congratulate West Midlands Police for kind of their response to that. And it's great to have that update. So we'll carry on promoting that you're really taking it seriously. Previously, when you were kind of analysing the problem, you as in West Midlands Police, we've been told that with the chop shop kind of element, there was probably an organised crime element to it, and they were often exploiting young kids into doing it to help them. Is that narrative still an accurate way of describing kind of the scale of the issue?
That's definitely a narrative that's applicable for part of it.
Yeah.
So there's the organised bit, then there's always the opportunist bit,
Yeah.
particularly with things like motorbikes, and for particular models of vehicle. And I know yourselves and we've done some joint marketing around some of the steering locks, some of the different types of vehicles that were taken. But what we've tried to do is put quite a bit of effort around the organised criminality that are taking them, chop shopping them or exporting them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get some, I know it's hard to be precise about these things, but some sense and proportion, just so we know that when we're talking to members of the community, we're kind of giving them a reliable story about what's causing. Is the organised crime a sufficiently large proportion to?
Yes, it is, definitely.
Yeah.
Because there has to be a market of where these things are going.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Chief Constable. Would you like to ask your third question, Tom?
Yeah, final question for me. It is recently reported that data breaches by Police Service of Northern Ireland and a suspected breach by the Metropolitan Police revealed personal details of thousands of police officers and staff, potentially putting their safety in jeopardy. What assurances can West Midlands Police give us that the same will not happen here?
So I asked for an immediate audit on the back of some of that reporting, particularly in Northern Ireland. And since then, there's been a couple of other national issues with regards to warrant cards. So on the back of that audit that we did, we've had a couple of forces come and visit to see the way that we've been doing things, which is quite positive. The audit was endorsed really our approach. So all the staff are trained, and in particular, the learning from Northern Ireland and other places And from some of our learning in the past is our approach to spreadsheets, particularly in disclosing data following FOI requests or subject access requests, etc. And then there being some hidden data behind a spreadsheet, a copy and paste sort of approach. So that learning has been put in place, and from our perspective, we're in a healthy position, which has been sort of endorsed by the audit team as well. Now, in relation to warrant cards, one of the issues there was that the warrant card sort of issuance, etc., had effectively been contracted out to a third party. We don't do any of that. It's all in-house. So no data goes to someone else, which that third party were penetrated by an external actor, let's say. So all ours is in-house.
Thanks for offering that assurance. Are we confident what we've got is sufficiently, and I know it's difficult to get an independent view that is itself secure from a data and security perspective, but do we have some kind of legitimate independent perspective on whether what we've got here in West Midlands Police is all in order?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think the joint audit work that we've got and the people that are involved in that offer us that independence of opinion. Yes, okay, they work for us for both our corporation soles, but I trust their judgment, and I also get a little bit of confidence from the fact that others have come to see what we were doing.
Just to confirm, we have actually got freedom of information in the audit plan this year, so that will be commencing, which is slightly different to the audit that Chief Constable's referring to, which is their forces internal audit and compliance team. So we'll give some independence on that process.
I suppose it's not that I doubt whether we're in a good place or not. I wouldn't know, but I take your assurance at face value. I guess it's just there's new ways in which data breaches occur, aren't they? And we sometimes learn about them when it's too late by seeing it in the news about somebody else. And sometimes it's that truly independent perspective that helps us see the potential weaknesses, but it's very hard for us to see when we're in it day in, day out. So I guess it's just a gentle challenge to consider going forward whether an independent pair of eyes somehow could just really give us doubly strength of assurance, given just how serious it is if it goes wrong. It's kind of worth going, the extra yards, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, in our IT department, we employ people that do, well, penetration testing it's called. They try and hack in. So we've got, we are a large organisation with a lot of data, and we take it seriously. You can never say 100% of 100%. We have quite a decent amount of resource invested in making sure that the data is held secure. And I think perhaps we wait and see what the outcome of, a little bit more work is before we take another view. So at the moment, I'm content with what we've got. Are there any opportunities to learn? Well, we're always sort of first at the queue, really.
Thank you, Chief Constable. The next question is to be asked by board member Linda Darkham.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, Chief. According to the latest media reports, retail crime is on the increase. This particular crime is affecting businesses so hard that staff are now not feeling safe in their workplace. Can the Chief Constable please explain the following? What are the retail crime figures for West Midlands? What is West Midlands Police doing to tackle this issue? And finally, is there evidence that the cost of living crisis is impacting on retail crime?
Okay, so good question. You're right with regards to the levels of retail crime. So locally and nationally, certainly post-COVID, the volume has increased quite significantly back up. So we and every other force in the country are above our levels. I mean, in terms of where we stand at the moment, post-COVID as well, we've also had an increase in crime recording because of our integrity issues 2.5, 3 years ago. So I think more offences are being reported as well. I think we're up by about 3,500 offences. So I'm pleased that people are reporting. And I think that goes hand in hand with our advances in call handling, whereby our attrition rate has virtually fallen off a cliff. So we're answering the calls for service much more than we used to. But in terms of that pure volume, absolutely, it has gone up. Is there a link between that and post-COVID crime recording? And as you suggest, a link across to cost of living, etc. I think if it was just in one force, you would be able to say, well, I'm not quite sure, but it's every force across the country. So I'll leave you to make your own mind up about that, because politically, I'm not going to get into that sphere. However, I do think that what you can see, if you look at the types of things that are stolen, an increasing number of those things are food-related products. And if you look at some of the security measures in some of the shops and look at what they are tagging, more and more often they are food-related rather than bottles of champagne. Yeah. So I think you can, make a fairly well-informed determination from that I've just said. So what we're doing about it, realistically, our approach is one whereby we try and keep it local. So good relationships with the shops, not just the big shops, but with the local retailers. I think the impact is felt much more harshly by those that don't seem to have a very big voice. So the chief exec of Waitrose can say, oh, let's have a brew in every Waitrose supermarket for every police officer on duty. Well, if you were to map the Waitrose supermarkets across the West Midlands, you wouldn't find many brew stops. So I think more of our focus is quite naturally based on the local corner shops, sort of single trader type approach. What we try and do is work with them from a business crime perspective. So to try and get the investment in the CCTV, because they can't afford store detectives like some of the big stores. Although I do think some of the big stores, over my time in policing, have pared back their security, and the number of store detectives I don't think is as many as it used to be, quite frankly. But we work in partnership with most of the big shopping centres with their own private security, but it's the small retails that we're trying to really do a bit more with. So we have a couple of weeks of Safer Business Action Weeks. The next one is in October, and we very much want to put a little bit more resource into that. We take shoplifting seriously. Yes, we've got a divert scheme for sort of low-level offences of nicking Mars bars, but realistically, this is a crime that affects people who are trying to earn a living, running a business, small and large. And I think a little bit more support around the smaller retailers is probably where we will be pushing in the future.
On that point, Jane, yes, I appreciate everything you said, Chief, but yeah, it's affecting the small business people here. They're living at the end of the day, the local corner shop, the local mini market, it is their living. Hardworking people who are just trying to make a decent living who are being affected. But it's very sad when you hear that people working for big organisations as well, that staff are scared to go in. They're unhappy to go in, because of feeling now that these people are coming in, and some people make it a habit. Some people, sadly, if I put my neck on the line, maybe it is a cost of living. Maybe people dream of anything like this and they've been forced into this particular area of crime. But it'd be interesting to know what the figures are, if I can think back to the new year on this, with Christmas on the horizon, and figures for West Midlands. I'm interested in figures for West Midlands. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. The final question is from myself. Given the level of public concern about nitrous oxide, both locally, regionally and nationally, the risk of permanent neurological disability that can arise from its use as a recreational drug, the concerns in connection with the dangers and risks that can arise from its use whilst in control of a vehicle and the associated antisocial behaviour, there is a concern that West Midlands Police are not taking effective enforcement action based on existing law, together with partners if necessary, against irresponsible and unscrupulous retailers who appear to be plainly selling nitrous oxide unlawfully.
So I think we are in a position whereby we've got some good opportunities here. So we're working on a £500,000 bid to try and tie in a lot of the personal possession stuff around some of the stuff that we've done with Cranston. That at the moment, I am told, is making decent progress. So I'm fairly optimistic about that. So I think that's part of the solution with regards to possession type offences, because I wouldn't want on a recreational drug basis to unnecessarily criminalise young people who are taking this. I would want the education and the diversion as the first option before we then incrementally move to a prosecution-based approach. But I see this as one of the opportunities whereby we can work with local trading standards, because lots of this stuff is sold as sort of secondary type products, and it's fairly obvious that, you know, nitrous oxide containers are not going to anything else other than to be inhaled. I mean, that's just a basic, you know, common sense perception. But what we need to do is try and focus on persuading some of those shopkeepers not to do it. And you do that by working in partnership and attacking the license side of things. So that's where we will be pushing it more. So 2 stages on the approach. One is make sure you've got something good in place for those that are taking it recreationally, particularly younger people, to divert them away. So you remove some of the market in that way. And then secondly, to target the dealers, in effect, the suppliers. And I think the best way of doing that is a threat around individual licenses to traders.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Agenda item 5 is violence reduction. And this agenda item will be a verbal update presented by Sarah Roach, Director of the Violence Reduction Partnership, Hannah Pauly, Community Safety Manager at Wolverhampton City Council, and Di Roden, Director of Nursing at Birmingham Solihull Integrated Care Board. We're asking that each of your presentations please be kept to no more than about 6 minutes or so as to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion of the issues arising from your presentations. And we'll take any comments and questions once all 3 of the presentations have been completed. So Sarah, I understand that you'll be starting us off.
I will,
So
yeah.
to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a general update and then just talk a little bit about the serious violence duty and some of the priorities that are coming through the work that we're doing. And then I'm going to hand over to Anna to talk about Wolverhampton in a bit more detail. So those of you that know the Violence Reduction Partnership was funded up until the end of March 25, which is the end of a 3-year funding settlement, and the sort of accountable board around that is the Violence Reduction Partnership Strategic Board, which is chaired by the Police and Crime Commissioner, and that group holds to account the specified authorities named within the serious violence duty and other agencies in terms of how we work together to prevent and reduce violence. There's a number of subgroups for that board that coordinate the work that we do around data and evaluation. And there's an operational group which brings together the Violence Reduction Partnership leads at a local level, together with the extended specified authorities that really have that oversight around commissioning, sustainability, communications, and other business that comes out of the strategic board. We've got regional and local commissioning processes. So we regionally commission some services and then we provide funding to local violence reduction boards and partnerships so that they can commission locally in terms of their priorities. And in response to the serious violence duty, we have recently agreed to commission a range of regional services to respond to regional priorities that are coming through strategic needs assessment. Just as a general update, Q1 this year, the services that we commissioned directly as a VRP benefited 21,727 young people into the age of 25 and 1,898 professionals. In terms of the overall service that the VRP provide, we would work with local areas around data, around evaluation. We have navigators that both lead on specific themes around criminal justice, education, health, and other areas, and then we have local navigators that work within local partnerships to support that real sort of agitation around the violence reduction system and see where we can understand where there's any gaps and challenges that we can work together on. The serious violence duty, just quickly, people are unaware of it, was introduced and set out in the Police Crime Sentencing and Reports Act 22, and it requires specified authorities who they name as police, fire and rescue, local authorities, integrated care boards and probation and youth offending teams to work together to produce a strategic needs assessment and in response to that produce a strategy which sets out the work they can do individually and together. So the duty was commenced in January and we're in a position in the West Midlands where we have 7 local boards now where we can point to where people, particularly specified authorities, come together to look at how they can reduce violence and what their local priorities are. In terms of the sort of legislative timelines, the local areas had to set out how they were going to meet the requirements in the duty by the end of March this year, and they're required to produce a strategic needs assessment and a response plan by the end of January next year. And then that response plan has to be reviewed every 12 months. In terms of the duty, there was some funding made available that came through the Violence Reduction Partnership. And as part of the support from the Home Office, there was a CREST were commissioned to do a readiness review across the West Midlands. The West Midlands were identified as preparing. The reason for that was because we had agreed locally that rather than just use our regional strategic needs assessment and our regional response strategy to respond to the duty, we wanted to set up and support local boards so that they could do their strategic needs assessment in a much more detailed way and provide those nuances that we know exist in local areas where those priorities are going to be slightly different and some of those themes will be different. So as a result of being identified as preparing, we've received 9 support days from CREST. They generally used those support days to do a review of the 7 strategic needs assessments so that we understood what are the common themes and priorities across the West Midlands and how we can then in turn use those to inform a regional strategy that will sit above all of those 7 boards. In terms of some of the key findings from CREST, there were 4 key risk factors that had come across and out of all of the 7 strategic needs assessments around education, substance misuse, their different demographics and particularly deprivation and poverty. And most of the SNAs identified early identification of trauma and adverse childhood experiences was a real priority. Violence was heavily concentrated in a number of small areas, which I don't think is going to be a surprise to anybody, and we know that it disproportionately impacts people and places. There was a need for robust commissioning processes and a much better process to measure impact of commissioned services, which we'll be looking to do through the strategy. And from the work that the SNAs have done with local communities, 3 of the key headlines was feelings of safety after dark, gaps in responding to vulnerability, and concerns about addressing the drivers of violence. What really came out through the SNAs, but also through an event we had recently last week, was the importance of the education sector in addressing those key risk factors and how we need to understand what works in education, particularly around reducing exclusions and increasing attendance. So I'm now going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to talk a little bit more around Wolverhampton Serious Violence Duty and response to the Serious Violence Duty. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So yeah, I'm going to try and talk about how we've implemented the Serious Violence Duty within Wolverhampton. Obviously, it's been a lot of work, so this is very much a summary that hopefully gives a bit of context about how this is kind of being implemented locally. I think the first thing I'd say is that we weren't starting from scratch in Wolverhampton, and I know that's the same across the region in terms of when the Serious Violence Duty landed. And so we already had a violence and exploitation strategy. And that strategy actually had joint governance between our safeguarding board and our community safety partnership. So there were already kind of those links there between safeguarding and criminal justice. So as we already had that kind of strategic level commitment, what we felt we really needed to help oversee our response to the duty was more of a kind of tactical group to oversee the specific activity which needed to take place as a result of the duty. So we established a violence prevention group and that group's oversee our implementation locally. We've conducted a needs assessment as have all the other areas and that's been really helpful in kind of developing a shared understanding of what the drivers are of violence locally and how we need to respond to those. And we also did kind of a mapping exercise. So we reviewed existing violence prevention activity within Wolverhampton, as well as the partnership response to any serious incidents. We, alongside this, had independent reviews of local practice and themes, so specific cases where there have been incidents of violence within the city. Somebody independent came in and reviewed those almost as kind of a CSPR type review. So whilst our needs assessment was very kind of strategic and data driven, we also had specific learning from cases within there as well to give some context. We already did have strong regional relationships with both the Office of the Peace and Crime Commissioner and the Violence Reduction Partnership, but I think through the duty, we've really built on that, and as well built on our relationships with other local authorities within the West Midlands, shared best practice. So it's been really useful to kind of come together and learn from each other as well. We've strengthened health and education attendance at a strategic level to our CSP. So as Sarah mentioned, education kind of came out really key in our needs assessment. So we've made sure that there's representation at a strategic level in terms of the education response to violence. And we were also really keen that community voice was central to the work of the serious violence duty. So we've had a number of community workshops which have engaged with over 300 Wolverhampton residents, kind of third sector partners, who have been able to share their views on what they think needs to happen locally to prevent violence. So just a few reflections, additional reflections really, is I think having that strategic kind of oversight is really important, but equally important is having that really strong governance structure which allows for operational delivery as well. So we're really keen that now we've got our needs assessment and we know what we need to do, there's really close operational oversight on kind of how that's being implemented and the effect it's having. We found that there's a really strong offer for young people and families across the spectrum of risk within Wolverhampton, and also that a wide range of data has been made available from various different sectors. So whilst there have been some sort of barriers in terms of data sharing, just in terms of everyone using different systems and things being recorded slightly differently, which we've had to overcome, that commitment to share data has always been there and to work together and to share information. So that's been really positive. Our young people, to be honest, have been amazing in the process. So they've been really keen to engage with us, young people from across all of our different communities within Wolverhampton. We've given them a platform and they've absolutely taken that up and shared their views with us. So that's been really useful. Just in terms of some of the challenges moving forward, I think a key thing for us locally is going to be around addressing negative perceptions of safety, particularly amongst young people. So we did a survey with our young people, and what we found is that young people are reporting less often to be victims of crime and violence. But what that isn't reflected in is when we ask them about how they feel about crime and violence. So they actually feel more at risk than they did previously. So whilst we are seeing those reductions, it feels like young people aren't feeling safer as a result of that. Additionally, when we did some work with our youth offending cohort, we found that those that did carry a weapon, one of the key reasons they gave for doing that was because they didn't feel safe or they were carrying a weapon for protection. So I think that's going to be really key, kind of making sure that our young people within the city feel safe. Another thing which we found is that whilst we do have, we believe, a strong offer for our young people and families, young people and families didn't necessarily know how to access that or didn't know what was available. So we're developing at the moment a communication pathway to make really clear what the offer is and how people can access that. I think a key challenge for us continues to be measuring success against long-term outcomes. So we really want to focus on prevention, preventing violence as early as possible. But obviously, when we're working with, for example, early years cohorts, we're likely not to see that impact in terms of violence reduction for, you know, maybe a decade or more. So that's really challenging in the face of sort of short-term funding, because it's really difficult to show that impact within sort of 1 or 2 years. And utilising data. So as I said, we've got a lot of data that's informed our strategic needs assessment. We now need to really operationalise that. So make sure that we know exactly how that data is impacting our commissioning, where we're delivering our services, how people are engaging with our services. So that's another focus for us going forward. And lastly, and I think this is sort of across the board, we're really keen to continue to develop our understanding in terms of what works when we talk about violence prevention. So we continue to deliver activity, we continue to commission services, and they do see good results in terms of engagement, in terms of feedback from young people. I think we really need to understand better what impacts that's actually having in terms of preventing violence, because that bit's a lot harder to measure. Really difficult to measure prevention, obviously. So we're working through that across the region, really, in terms of how we better understand what works. And now I'm going to go for the dive and talk about health. Thank you.
So I'm coming from a slightly different angle because although health isn't new to serious violence, we've probably not thought of it as an NHS priority before as much as we are at the moment. And you might wonder why I'm sat here as an ICB in front of you guys, but I think it's the first part of that slide. We had a letter from NHS England back in February of this year and said that although the NHS should be thinking about prevention of violence, it's actually a statutory duty to the ICB. So that's why you've got me and not somebody from UHB Trauma Centre. I'm also sitting here on behalf of the Black Country ICB and also Coventry ICB as we're working very closely together with all of this. But you can see on that first slide, he's talking about the Joint Forward Plan. So this is something that we had when we went from a CCG into an ICB. NHS England tackled all the ICBs with the Joint Forward Plan, and there's actually a specific part of that now that addresses the needs of victims of abuse. So we already do some things, and you can see them there. So we commission quite a few things with regards to domestic abuse and sexual violence. The NHS has just launched its NHS Sexual Safety Charter as well, which will bring this more to the forefront. But I'm quite lucky in BSAR that we actually had some money invested into a MARAC team because we know the issues of MARAC across Birmingham. So that team actually sits within my team in the ICB and actually shares information to and from other NHS providers. As you know, I span both Birmingham and Solihull local authorities, so I chair a number of their subgroups under the CSP and actually took a lead for Solihull on the VAUG agenda over the last couple of years, working really closely with police counterparts on that. And obviously, as from a Birmingham point of view, we're also part of the offensive weapons homicide reviews, which I've gone to the first time on. So what is our response to the serious violence duty? We've been given some clear things that we need to do. The first one of that is collaboration. And like I say, we're working very closely as 3 ICBs, and I'll come on to that in just a little while. But also we need to be there as part of the development and implementation of strategies across all our local authorities. And I do think, Sarah, that since the CCG became the ICB, I think we've got stronger links with the VRP also. But as I've just said, we have a responsibility to commission some of those services for victims of abuse as well. I think one of the big things, if I sat here and just said, what is your major concern around health, that would be the health data that we send into the VRPs and inform just the strategic needs assessments. So actually, we've been quite lucky. Well, no, we're appreciative of the funding that we've got from the VRP. So across the 3 ICBs, we will have a data person in place. And you can see on the very last slide what we're asking that data person to do. From a health perspective, we do share data. We just don't collect it how you guys want it and what is meaningful to you. So across the 3 ICBs, this person will visit all our, to start with, acute emergency departments and also WMAS, so West Midlands Ambulance Service, to get that emergency data. But we're looking at this as 2 phases. So we almost collect some of that data now. We've just got to tighten it up, find the gaps and plug those gaps. But the next part will be, the second phase will be what information we can pull out of mental health in primary care, which is something that we've not really done successfully over the past couple of years. So we've got that posting for the next 12 months and really hoping that this does make a difference to what you guys see from the data from NHS, which will help you inform that so what question when you see people coming through the ED. So that is our big piece of work, starting as soon as he's in post, which I hope is in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. It's much appreciated. So, do we have any comments or questions matters rising? Yes, board member Kath Hannon.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much for your presentation. Can we just explore a little bit the relationship with education? So clearly they're a really important part of what we want to do. Would you be able to explain how that relationship is managed? I in particular note that Birmingham is in a bit of disarray at the moment and how that relationship is going to be managed ongoing. And also for the schools that don't sit under local authorities, whether you've got some way to partner with them. So that's the first question. The second question is, there's been a recent reorganisation of West Midlands Resources. Has that changed how your services are delivered, or give us an idea of how that restructuring has impacted on what you do? Thank you.
Take the education question, and I might have over to Hannah to talk about Wolverhampton specifically. So we've got a team of training facilitators within the VRP that work across the 7 areas in schools delivering training. You've got a primary prevention package, which is a combination of training around ACEs, trauma-informed practice for professionals, mental and violence prevention. There's the REAL programme, which is around exploitation, and then there's some virtual reality programme around gangs. And we've also got some harmful sexual behaviour training that's gone into 60 schools across the region, funded through Safe Streets. So we have some really good relationships with a lot of schools across the region, and those training facilitators, which is why our numbers are so high in terms of reach every quarter in terms of young people. We're currently doing a process to understand where we haven't got that reach. So where we've not quite got the relationships we need to get into some of those schools. And we're doing that currently as we speak, but we have got a huge amount of reach across the region. In terms of Birmingham, we've got some really good relationships with the SAFE team to make sure that the SAFE offer doesn't duplicate our offer, and that we're working together so we can add value to each other, and the same with the AP task forces too. From a strategic point of view, we've just set up the education strategic group, which brings sort of senior leaders across the education system together. That met in June, identified some priorities for action around exclusions, around FEMH, FEND. Trying to think what the other priorities were. There was about 5 priorities that they identified that they wanted to pursue through that group, and it's meeting again, I think, the next week. No, October 13th, I think it's meeting. So at a strategic level, we've got the education group. At a local level, we've got the training facilitators. We've also got our navigators who are working in local partnerships. So we'll also have a relationship with the schools in their area. In Samwell, I think there's a particularly good example in Samwell that the 19 secondary schools have all written violence reduction plans, and that's a practice that we're looking at extending across other areas of the West Midlands. We have education representation on the strategic board through Dawn Dandy, who's the West Midlands DFE representative, and she also chairs that education strategic board that I talked about. So that's in terms of our reach. Do you want to talk about Wolverhampton?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer the question about kind of restructure, but before, just to add to Sarah's point around education, one of the things that we found really useful locally is our police and schools panel. So the vast majority of our secondary schools within Wolverhampton are signed up to the police and schools panel. So we meet regularly with them through that panel, the head teachers across all of our secondary schools. And we recently went to that panel to talk about the needs assessment, what the findings were and what the particular asks were from education. So they're really keen to kind of keep that conversation live and keep engagement through that panel as well as all the things which Sarah's spoken about. In terms of the restructure, I think from sort of a partnership and local authority perspective, one of the key things that we've noticed in Wolverhampton is there were already really good relationships kind of across different police sort of teams locally, but I think kind of our chief superintendent chairs our community safety partnership. So now obviously a lot more of those teams are reporting into him. It's really kind of increased the influence across policing locally, which I think has been really useful. Again, we've been able to share our serious violence response within that space. And then whilst the chief superintendent's always been able to kind of work with those teams, he's now able to kind of influence them much more closely, which has really helped where we've needed kind of that wider work to take place.
Just to go back to education, in terms of the work that our team do, we also work hand in hand with the schools intervention and prevention officers within the police. It's inconsistent at the minute in terms of how that works, but we've got some really good examples of where the SIPO school intervention and prevention officers are working really closely and are also delivering some of our training products, so that we've actually got that sort of holistic approach when we go into our schools. We've got an education strategic lead in the team that we haven't, it's a gap we're interviewing for it next week. We haven't had anyone post for some time, but again, they'll be managing 2 education intervention advisors. So they're coordinating work around trauma-informed schools, they're coordinating work around support for universities and colleges, looking at transitions, looking at the education resource toolkit that we've got, looking at updating that, and thinking about what are the resources and tools can we provide for education to improve their sort of early identification and response to violence. Around the restructure, I mean, the feedback we've got from local areas is really positive, especially directors of children's services and others through our senior safeguarding forum, because they feel now that they have influence and access over some of the resources that was centrally governed and centrally mandated before. And they, I think, find it much easier to have a conversation, a quick conversation locally with their local commander and others around any challenges that they might be facing around any of the services that may have been resourced regionally in the past. In terms of relationships on the ground with local police and areas, they're really good. We've got co-location of police stations and we're working really well together.
Very much sounds like some really positive and good work. I think I'll start to the chief as well.
Thanks very much for that response. Okay. I think the next question is from board member Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for this report. Very interesting. I've read the report. I read it the other day. I've read it again today. If I've missed something, I do apologise. But you talk about education, you talk about good links with police, but there's nothing in here about good links with places of worship. I mean, I'll talk about Wolverhampton because Wolverhampton is got the highest population of Punjabi-speaking people outside of West London, which is pretty high if it ranks second in the UK. But you've got nothing here saying that you're liaising with places of worship, where obviously there's a language barrier, and I think people need to know about this. What are you doing to address that?
We've got the Faith Alliance. So the Faith Alliance is doing a huge amount of work bringing together key leaders from all faiths and none. They're actually together somewhere in Birmingham today to develop the Faith Alliance strategy, which looks at how we can really maximise the role of faith leaders in communities in their capacity to identify and reduce violence amongst their community. We've got the Faith Alliance toolkit, which was produced last year, which we did roadshows all over the West Midlands around providing the tools and the resources for our faith leaders and communities generally to really think about the role that they can play, the assets that they have, how they can use those assets to support young people and to support the community. In terms of the Faith Alliance network, we've got, I think, 413 members up to now, and we're just developing a Connect directory, which is due to be published, which has sort of 70 different profile entries of different faith communities and different opportunities to engage around the Faith Alliance. We also have commissioned Positive Youth Foundation, who are developing a youth assembly for us. That youth assembly will be representative of communities. It's certainly going to be looking to draw together young people who wouldn't traditionally stand on a platform or put themselves forward for engagement, but absolutely want to share their experiences of being on the cusp of or within the criminal justice system to really inform our response and make sure that we're working together to prevent young people becoming victims or offenders of crime. So the Faith Alliance is probably the key vehicle through which the BRP are coordinating the work that we're doing with faith leaders. And I know that we've been talking about it in a lot of places across the country because this isn't something that violence reduction partnerships have done a lot of. So a lot of the other violence reduction units across the country are asking us to talk about it in their areas so they can start to learn from us and develop on the work that we're doing. I don't know whether you want to talk more about Wolverhampton.
Yeah, so we have done engagement in Wolverhampton largely through the Community Cohesion Forum, which brings together kind of faith leaders across the city. So we've worked with them in serious violence due in the community voice within that. I'll be honest, I think there's much more we can do. So we've started delivering some of our commission services from faith settings, which hopefully will help to engage kind of those young people that might not access it in kind of central youth provision, for example. But we're working really closely with faith leaders to kind of try and understand how we do that better. It's a key point on our action plan that's part of the needs assessment in terms of continuing our development with faith leaders and strengthening that. And yeah, absolutely something we definitely kind of continue to work towards and strengthen.
I just final point, Commissioner. Thanks for the answer there. Now, you say that you've got Faithful Alliance and you speak with faith leaders, but are you actually confident that faithful leaders, Faithful Alliance are approaching every single place of worship, or is it just targeted areas? Because pretty sure there's a lot of places that need people to go in and speak to them. And what response are they getting back? I mean, do they report directly back to yourselves? Have you got a report from the faith leaders, from the Faithful Alliance, that this place of worship, this community is saying this community is saying this? Have you got anything that you could come back to us in future time with?
I mean, we could bring a report back in terms of the work of the Faith Alliance and some of the outputs and outcomes that work's achieving. I can sit here hand on heart and say that we're going into every location where we've got faith leaders, faith groups, but we are trying our best to encourage that sort of spread of that message, that engaging with violence, not just with Violence Reduction Partnership. My priority, I think, as director when I came in, was we need to do more community engagement. So that's with all communities, all sectors of communities. It's an area we haven't done a lot of over the last few years. So we are looking at, through a restructure that I've just put in place, which comes into force on 1st of October, really making sure that our navigators on the ground. Up until now, we've had Fred Kratt, who is our Faith and Communities lead. He's doing a huge amount of work, but with the size of the West Midlands, there's no way we can just have one person leading on community engagement. So the restructure has meant that the navigators that work out in local communities have now really got a mandate that at least 50 to 60% of their focus, at the minute, most of their focus is working within partnerships, within systems, actually shifting that focus now to look into communities, to really asset map their local community, understanding what buildings they've got, what services they've got, what people they've got, talk to those people, really try and understand what does feeling safe mean to them and what can they do together to really identify and respond to violence in their locality. So there will be more work done around communities. And in 6 months, 12 months time, we'd like to bring, happy to bring the report back on that.
Let me just finally just say, you said the key word there, you hit the nail on the head, community engagement, which I've been saying for a long time now, Chief. That's the key, community engagement. And it's not just a matter of going in and picking a time, it's when the events are on, Baisakhi, the Diwali, there's so many events going on across the city with other faiths and that. For me, community engagement, that's what we should be going in and speaking to people.
And even without this focus that I've talked about through the restructure, if I were to gather from my navigators all of the different work that they've been doing in the local parks when they've had a fete or an event or other events, I think I'd still have quite a lot of information to provide to you, but I want that to be more, and there will be more engagement. And the other conversation I've even just been having this morning, actually, we're just developing the violence prevention strategy for the region, and we took the draft priorities of that strategy to the strategic, an extraordinary meeting with the strategic board yesterday. And we talked very much about counter narrative, didn't we, and community engagement, how we can make sure that communities really inform and influence what the priorities are, and how we, as the police, as the Violence Reduction Partnership, as local partnerships, really make sure that we focus on those areas that we know mean things to the community in terms of that's what their feedback tell us. So I've been thinking about that overnight, very sadly, because in the development of the strategy, we have engaged, we've commissioned an independent consultant who has engaged with young people, they've engaged with communities, they've taken all the research that Wolverhampton, for example, used from communities for their strategic needs assessment to really consolidate that to inform what our priorities are. So whilst we're comfortable that our priorities in the strategy at headline level are informed through communities and surveys and conversations, that is still too big and broad for the West Midlands. So whilst we'll have our strategy by November, that will be headline, what we need our navigators to do is really, particularly in our impact area, in our areas we know are disproportionately affected by violence, to take that strategy and make it real to them in terms of put it into their words. What does this mean for you? What do we need to do in your area? So that will be the next stage, to sort of take that regional strategy to a very local level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the Chief Constable wants to come in next.
Just briefly, first off, thank you for all the work that's going on. It's really good. The impact is quite often unseen for a while, and as you've just described, some of the investment in the early years, we're not going to see it for a few years to come. But I think we need to talk about it a bit more and perhaps market it a bit more. But my question was, I was out last week at Chelmsley Wood, and I was getting a briefing off the PCSOs that do the Princess Trust. I'm just wondering if you're linked into that, because from a prevention point of view, I think they do about 150, 160 a year. It felt like it was sort of that side of the force, and I'm just wondering if there's any opportunities to get that a little bit broader, and if you put it.
From a VRP perspective, we're not, but I think a lot of the local violence reduction partnerships are, in terms of working within their locality. I think they've got some really good relationships there. So from a regional level,
I'll
no.
pick that conversation with you.
Yeah, no,
I think
absolutely.
it's quite a good thing across, and it's something that you can sort of almost report back on, particularly when it comes to some funded streams.
That's right.
Thank you, Chief. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of questions really in relation to the wider partnership structures. So in terms of the combating drugs and alcohol partnerships that are local, I just wondered whether there was any engagement with them, referencing, I guess, particularly that some recommendations came up around substance abuse. And then in terms of the health and wellbeing boards, again, just wondering the degree to which serious violence features on their agenda, given the number of health partners referenced.
So in terms of the substance misuse boards, yeah, they've been a key partner in development of strategy. So they provided a lot of our data through the data that they've already collected through their needs assessment to then inform ours. I'm actually going to brief them on Friday in terms of the recommendations so that they can help develop the action plan that's going to sit behind that. So they're really linked in. In terms of health and wellbeing boards, that's something which we've worked really hard on over the last 12 months. So I think I can only speak for Wolverhampton, but traditionally we've been really, so the community safety partnership and the safeguarding boards have had that kind of really close relationship. The health and wellbeing board has probably been missing a little bit from that conversation. So the last 12 months we've really tried to engage them. They're just refreshing their strategy at the moment, and the community safety partnership are refreshing theirs as well. So we've worked really closely to make sure that those strategies align. Substance misuse will run through all three, as will violence prevention. So then we just need to work out how kind of we make sure that that governance isn't duplicating anything, and that it's that everyone's reporting into the right place essentially. But yeah, hopefully moving forward we'll see that alignment more with the new strategies.
And that sounds really positive. Do you have a sense, Sarah, as to the degree to which that is the case across the rest of the patch? Or
I think Wolverhampton lead the way when it comes to making sure that they have that cross-cutting strategic governance across the different thematic partnerships. I don't think you will see that across all areas. I can't say exactly what position each of the areas in. But I do think there's more work to do. Even as a violence reduction partnership, I think we've made really good links across with community safety partnerships, the local violence reduction boards, nestled underneath. So that's, and we do those links locally, don't we, through heads of community safety and through the PCC. Where there's more work to be done, I think, is where we connect safeguarding children's and adults boards with the work of the community safety partnership. So we haven't yet cracked that as a VRP. I chair a senior safeguarding strategic meeting every 8 weeks, which brings together the 7 directors of children's services, a chief assistant, chief constable, the 3 ICBs, the DFE Education West Midlands link, and NHSE, and that has provided a really good vehicle through which we connect the PCC's responsibility around safeguarding, the VRP's work around safeguarding at a regional level. I don't yet think we're seeing that on the ground, but that's work in progress. But the connectivity with community safety and community safety's connectivity with substance misuse has always really been there.
Thanks, Simon. Are we on course to ensure that the serious violence duty will be implemented by the required date on 31st of January 2024?
Yes, so the 7 strategic needs assessments are all at different stage of sign-off. The regional strategy will come for sign-off at the strategic board in November, with a view to giving us some time there, depending on what happens in November. It's the end of January that we have to have the strategic needs assessments and the strategy and all 7 boards in place. So yeah, we're absolutely on course. In terms of, I thought you were going to say on course around reducing serious youth violence. The figures are going in the right direction. But I think it's really important what Hannah said. If people aren't feeling it, it's not going to make a difference. So we need to do a lot of work around a counter narrative and communications, and really starting to talk to our young people and to get using social media for good, all of those things that we need to start to do to make people feel safer and not just rely on the figures.
Do you think we could be doing more to communicate to people what the serious violence duty actually means to them? So, for example, if I go to a residents' meeting tomorrow evening and somebody says to me, serious violence duty, never heard of it, what difference is it actually going to make to me on a day-to-day basis?
I think I have produced you an infographic following this conversation the other day, so I've got something you can give people. But I think it's important that they know that it's not just the police. I think it's important that they know this isn't about arresting people and taking people off the streets. Whilst that's part of it, this is about how we create the conditions for young people to really understand and understand the implications of violence and the consequences, and for us to take a really long-term approach working with local authorities, police, probation, fire and rescue, and youth offending services to really start to try and make a difference for young people. So I think there's some really easy ways to describe it, and I think it's particularly about, as I said at the very beginning, communities recognising this isn't a problem for the police alone.
And then just following implementation of serious violence duty after January 2024, are there processes that are going to be in place in order to enable us to be able to actually evaluate the impact of the serious violence duty once it's in place?
Evaluating the impact of the serious violence duty, I guess there's a number of ways you manage that, isn't there? There's seeing how locally, I think the strategic board has got a role to play in understanding and challenging how the specified authorities are working together at a local level. In terms of the impact it's having on reducing violence, as part of the development of the regional strategy, there'll be a evaluation framework, if you like, so that up until now, we've very much measured ourselves on the Home Office 3 metrics that they measure violence reduction units on, which is around homicide, knife-enabled crime and hospital admissions. We don't just want to measure those, we want to measure a much broader basket that look at the root causes, look at exclusions and a whole range of other, not a great big basket, but a bigger basket that we will be able to hold ourselves to account on in terms of making sure we're having an impact more broadly, not just on those 3 crime measures.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or matters arising or comments that anybody else would like to contribute? Don't see anybody else indicating. So, firstly, thank you very much, Sarah, Hannah and Di, for coming along and providing us with your presentation and for answering our questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much. So, that concludes agenda item 5. Agenda item 6 is preventing and reducing crime, with a particular focus on reducing serious youth violence. And this agenda item is to be presented by Chief Superintendent Kim McDill and is to be supported by Acting Chief Inspector Tony Eustace and Director of our BRP Sarah Roach. We're asking the presentation please be kept to no more than about 5 minutes or so, on the assumption that board members have all had an opportunity to read the paper. It's available to members of the public to read, and so as to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion following the report. So could you please kindly present the report?
Indeed, yes, and hopefully it'll be about 3 minutes then, just as an overview. I think it's important just to talk about the kind of central and then the local structures. So centrally, I am the strategic lead for serious youth violence, and we govern ourselves in kind of 3 main functions. So we've got a Guardian intelligence team, so that they support us with our analytics and our data to make sure we understand the problem and we're able to respond to it. We have a Guardian task force, which are officers that support areas where there might be a critical issue or an emerging theme or trend or a long-term challenge where we know that there are serious youth violence offences being committed or concerns. And we of course have our BRP integration with Tony Eustace here as well. We're supported by Home Office GRIP funding, which is £3.2 million per annum. And local policing areas under that kind of central structure have a really key role in using that intelligence that's produced from the team to really respond and deliver in terms of that local context. Some of that GRIP funding is used locally to ensure that we police our targeted guardian patrol areas, and there's a lot of detail in the paper about what they are and the impact that we've had. Up until now, those areas have been mainly about visibility in the times that we've been patrolling, but we're moving now into a phase where we're focusing on more on multi-agency problem solving in around about 10 of those kind of key areas, and each local policing area will have at least one of those areas. They've been a little bit stubborn in terms of the reductions, if I can describe it like that. So we've had really good compliance in terms of the patrols in those locations, but we're not necessarily seeing the reductions that we've seen elsewhere as a result of pure visibility. So we recognise that. How do we kind of bring that partnership problem solving approach into those spaces? You'll see from the paper we now have a 4 serious youth violence strategy with a number of key priorities and needs that report into a strategic board chair by ACC Claire Bow. And there's a number of kind of key focuses that the Intel team and the central governance are focusing on. So obviously the analytical assessment and evaluation, the TGP delivery, the problem orientated policing approach around serious youth violence, and that greater emphasis we're looking at with partners, and that key role and coordination with the VRP and the really strong relationship that we've got there. But we're also obviously about focusing on offenders, making sure we are dealing with those individuals who are committing offences, that we're focusing on quality and timely investigations, and we're also focusing on actioning any intelligence that we get, particularly that suggests a young person might be in possession of a weapon. And as Sarah mentioned a short while ago, we are seeing reductions this year in serious youth violence and serious youth violence where a knife has been used, and they are on the back of reductions at the end of the last performance year that we achieved then as well. And finally, we're seeing positive outcomes rates as well in terms of the way we are responding to those crimes that are reported to us. I think that was my kind of overall summary, but I'm more than happy to take questions. Cool.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. So do we have any comments or questions or matters arising from the presentation? Yes, Board Member Kath Hannan and then Board Member Lapindergar.
Good morning. This is just exploring some issues across the whole report there, Kim. So regarding children affected by parents' incarceration,
Yes.
Would you be able to tell us how do we know it's a successful resource for families and how are they supported? So that's the first question. The second is regarding the trauma-informed report. There seems to be a lot of work going on there, but how do we know it's been successful? How do we know staff are changing how they deal with victims and others? And how's that being shown? And how is that approach being embedded, particularly as staff move around the organisation quite a lot, that skill base isn't being lost, or how it's been transferred across from either officers or from group to group. So that's your starting point.
If you don't mind, I'll ask Tony to answer the paramount question because he's been leading that with the VRP, and then I'll come back on the floor.
Yes, okay. I think it's a really good question. It is a difficult thing to measure because the children affected by parental incarceration work is, we're only one of 2 or 3 regions that are doing that work. We called it Op Paramount, so we followed a model that Thames Valley, or loosely followed a model that Thames Valley had set up. Ours has been running since it went live in September last year. It took us about 6 months to set it up in terms of the processes and the systems to turn that prison data on its head so that we can find out who's gone to prison in a particular amount of time, cross-check with normal police and social local authority data to tell us and build a picture of families, family model, what children where. So we commissioned a charity called Chas Children Heard and Seen to work with us through the VRP. So we've got a practitioner that works purely in the West Midlands. They're an Oxford-based charity, but we're working with them at the moment. And through September's, going live in September to roughly where we are now, we've identified about 350 to 400 people in this pilot area, which is in the north of Birmingham. If we do the whole of the West Midlands, we're bringing in all of the local authorities. It needs a lot more funding. This is the testing model for this area at the moment. And as it stands, we're working with about 45 families from that Children Heard and Seen are currently working with. We've got a number of measures that we are trying to assess for those families. So, we're working with children as young as about 5 or 6 all the way through to about 17, 18 that have predominantly a father figure in prison in the West Midlands region. And we're monitoring things like education, attendance, attitudes and behaviours, police legitimacy, reoffending rates, all of those things we're trying to share data with. So we've got all that data captured at the moment, but we're only a year into this. We're also working with our partners at the University of Wolverhampton to take that data and assess how effective it is at the moment, because we have got other local authorities in the region that want to replicate this. Obviously, they need a hard and fast evaluation in quantitative figures to see if it's successful. But at the moment, for the families that are working with a practitioner from Chas, we've seen some really, really positive work. And actually, it's led to a number of inquiries from a multitude of forces who want to know what we're doing.
What's the response from the families? Are all of them eager to engage, or do you get some that keep your arms on?
It's really mixed. So we do get some pushback, and a lot of it. The reason why we've taken the process that we go in person. So I know Thames Valley, and I think Leicestershire have started. They often send a letter out as an introductory, but what we wanted to do was actually sort of doorstep people and talk to them about how they've been identified, what the offer is. This is the practitioner that you'll be working with. And we do it with a police officer that's based in the early help hub as well. They're plain clothes, they don't wear uniform, they share data with their local authority counterparts in that early help hub. So a lot of it is just breaking down those barriers on the doorstep. But I've been to a number of visits when we first set it up, and you do get that pushback because it's authority again on the doorstep. Dad's gone to prison. The last time we saw you was because of a warrant that came through the door. So we're going into that sort of trauma lens, that trauma approach, but we're there to help them. So we do get some pushback, but we make sure that we track those families and we make follow-up phone calls and letters to say the offer's still there. We want to come back. We're not just going to come once. We've had a number then we've taken a bit more work, but have got on board with us.
And somebody watching this, if anybody does watch later, they might question why all that time and effort is going into those families. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the background and the literature that supports it.
There's a huge correlation between preventing incarceration and then intergenerational offending. So the statistics are really stark. That if certainly for boys, if their father goes into prison, I can't remember what the statistics are off the top of my head, but there's a hell of a good chance that they will enter the criminal justice system through that victim into the perpetrator cycle. And we used all of that sort of academic literature and the research that we've done to go into generating the business case to start the work. So I can share those statistics. They're in papers that I put together, and that's why we're trying to. And I think that any violence plan that we have locally has to build this in, because what we see that knock-on effect is if we have a parental in prison, a lot of the time we see those younger sons predominantly will then be in the community offending, committing crime, end up being predominantly violent offenders themselves.
Project, so maybe we could have a report in the not too distant future that gives us an insight into.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you very much.
Picking up the trauma point, I'll try and be quick because it's an area that I've been working on since 2015 and I'm really, really passionate about it. So I chair our Trauma Informed Governance Board, which is quite a newly formed board, being run for about a year. In terms of kind of the impact of the work that we've done, we've had a number of evaluations conducted around particularly the custody work, which was where it kind of started around training the staff in that environment, with a particular focus on young people coming into custody and how you could kind of support young people in that environment. That piece of evaluation was done by Wolverhampton University. It looked at both the staff response, but also those that we engage with in the custody block, and it's very positive in terms of the kind of impact. There are a number of ongoing actions from that I've now taken into the board. I think the really key thing about trauma aware and trauma informed approaches, once people realise that people's kind of trauma and journey takes them on a certain path, it brings a certain level of empathy. Particularly amongst kind of police officers then who want to kind of work with that individual to divert them away from whatever situation, whether it's pre-crime, you know, or during a custody environment, to make sure that that doesn't happen again, because it gives that level of understanding. When we first did this work back in 2015-16, again, we had some evaluation done by Birmingham University, which confirms that kind of culture shift. In terms of how do we know it's successful, all of the leads around all of the departments of the organisation are just looking at what does that mean for my area of business? How can we measure this then in terms of the impact that it's having, both internally, because the trauma-informed piece of work is about how we look after our colleagues from a wellbeing perspective, as well as then how do we do that in the community. So that's all being kind of scoped out of the individual delivery plans. In terms of the point about how we're embedding it and ensuring that it's kind of embedded if people are moving on, I think sometimes if people move on, that's good because they take that knowledge with them. We've had a clear plan around training, so new recruits were trained, custody were trained, and response were trained, and the plan moving forward is starting to focus on force contact. So our call takers, which will help with our right care, right person implementation and some of those referrals at the front end that we want to do. We're refreshing the neighbourhood teams training as best we can as well. They were trained a long time ago actually, and I think that's where we see the most benefit. And we're also looking at places like intelligence and forensics for the next part of the training. I sit on the Trauma Informed Coalition for the region. And we are hopefully going to be able to publish a cost benefit analysis in the new year that demonstrates kind of the financial as well as the moral and cultural impacts around the approach. So I could talk for hours, but hopefully that gives you an understanding. And if you want some more detail, I'm happy to share.
If I can just link this for a moment into public protection and rape and domestic abuse. I've read somewhere recently that something like 75% of rape victims are traumatised by coming into contact with criminal justice organisations, and the outcome 16 that we'll see later for victims who don't support a police prosecution is extraordinarily high. So trauma informed in the public protection units, where are we with making sure that that's embedded, and whether there's enough staff there to be able to deliver that service, whether they're trauma informed or not?
Yeah, so obviously I don't lead the public protection team, but I'm aware of the Oxyteria project, which is a national approach around how we respond to rape and serious sexual violence. So I know that work is being done. So public protection have a seat at the table, and one of the things we're working towards to kind of support the staff giving a better service is actually a biometrics project around their own health and well-being, to kind of make sure they're in the best possible place. To support victims that come forward and report those really serious matters. So I don't have, a full answer to that. Again, I can get my public protection colleagues to respond in more detail if you like.
What's the biometrics?
So biometrics, it's part of the Oscar Kilo work nationally that we've agreed to support as a pilot. So this will be about officers wearing technology to kind of check their well-being and health, and then an enhanced well-being officer offer to the colleagues who work in that environment, who are also clearly traumatised by some of the matters that they're dealing with. Again, with a view then to that enhanced service coming to kind of victims because they feel valued and supported in the organisation.
Really interesting, thank you.
We did roll out the PPU, both child and adult, did feature on the training plan as part of Trauma Aware. So from January to March this year, the PPU as well as EPSID did have mandatory training sessions that were delivered about being sort of more trauma aware, and those were operationally really relevant to those departments. And what we do is we get Bernardo's in, we set up focus groups to understand the work that PPU were involved in, including serious sexual offences teams, and to try and build that trauma awareness training package as in line with their work and what they need to appreciate with both the victims and the offenders that they're dealing with. I think we limited because we only train a percentage of the workforce in the department because of the demands of what we need to do here across the board with all of the police and the staff that we do need to train. The PPU at some point will either be revisited and refreshed, or through the coalition, when we have the L&D framework, we'll be able to offer sort of tailored bite-sized training chunks as part of their ongoing CPD. I think that's probably the ambition.
Yeah, and I think actually there's one final point on that. We have explored a train the trainer model so that we don't rely on the commissioned kind of training company to come in, and we're actually moving to a position where we're looking to develop a digital package so that we're not reliant on that ongoing funding model to bring Bernardo's in to keep training and retraining. We've got a platform called Blackboard actually that I've seen our Right Care Right Person training being framed on. It's really, really impressive, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to use this platform and produce a really good product that we can then roll out more broadly across the wider organisation.
Thank you. Next question is from Board Member Bhupinder Garthal, and then Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner Tom McNeil.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is a really good paper. I do like it. I've had a good read of this. It is a really good paper, but there's always a but with me there, I'm sorry. But if we come into the real world, we need officers to deliver this. We need boots on the ground to deliver this. Now, Westmead Police, we've lost thousands of police officers, over 2,000 since 2010. Even with the current intakes we're having, we're still not up to them figures. We received the 5th worst financial settlement, compared to other forces across the UK. Government talks about levelling up, about fair funding. I don't think I know what that word actually means, but can it be delivered with the amount of, because the police are damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It's one of them scenarios where I got people sitting around saying, many of you have attended PATS meetings. It's, sometimes you sit there thinking it's a police bashing meeting, or it's a local authority bashing meeting, but it's very difficult to deliver them. Can you, say to me, yes, we are delivering it. It's very successful. And finally, I'm really interested in paragraph 2D, where it says community consultation and engagement. Can you share with the board today, obviously some other time, what feedback you receive from communities when you've spoken to them, when you've engaged with them about this? Thank you, Chair.
So is it deliverable? I think the answer is yes, absolutely it is. And I think the figures speak for themselves. We reduced last year and we are reducing again this year. It isn't just a police response. I think Sarah mentioned earlier, this is a whole system approach, a whole partnership approach, and we've got a very important part in that, and we're structured in a way that allows us to ensure that we're delivering against the priorities that we've set. It remains a first priority in terms of our tactical processes, our strategic processes and our local processes. There is so much effort and emphasis in this work. We know how important it is to communities. So I think the short answer is absolutely it's deliverable. And I was trying to find the paragraph 2D in terms of community consultation and engagement. You wanted some more feedback at a later stage to say in relation to that.
Please, yeah. What feedback you've got from communities?
Yes, do you want to comment, Sarah, on that in terms of the youth engagement work that's been done from a VIP perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations that we've had with young people is that they want to see more police on the street. They want to feel safe. If they carry a knife to keep themselves safe. A lot of the information we get from communities and feedback we get from communities is that they want more things for young people to do, and they just generally see substance misuse as one of the key drivers. We've just done a survey actually, which 1,700 responses, but looking into the responses, I don't understand technology, but apparently a bot has probably done 500 of them. So we've probably got, so we've got 1,200 responses, which we're just going through, and we can share the findings of that. And the findings of that will also inform the priorities and the activities that go in the regional strategy. But we talked earlier around the community engagement that we want to do. That will further develop the conversations with local groups, local leaders, local areas. So there's some generic areas of feedback around from young people and from communities about wanting to feel safe, not feeling like there's been reductions, wanting to see more things for young people to do, more diversion, wanting us to deal with substance issues. They talk a lot about the canisters that they see in the street and some of the behaviours associated with that. But I think the survey will provide us some rich data to really understand exactly what people are saying.
Sorry, apologies. Can you share that information with the board though?
Absolutely.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhupinder. Tom, you're next.
Thank you. It's a little bit long-winded, this, you just have to humour me, because it's trying to tie in a few different things. But if I just start with the point that we're aware, I think we've been aware for many, many years, actually, before the Violence Reduction Partnership existed, that in order to tackle violence, you do need a holistic approach, because you might have a parent who's just come out of prison, which doesn't look like it's to do with preventing youth violence, but obviously they're a parent who might not be there for their children, and there might be complications at home, so forth. So interventions for a prison leaver are also actually early interventions for an infant, potentially, depending on family dynamics. Now, West Midlands Police are involved in a number of really, really good diversion projects. So some are people identified in custody, some are for prison leavers, some for people that frontline officers meet. But I've spoken with the chief about this, I've spoken with Tom Joyce about this, I've spoken with Andy Parsons, the new person who's come into criminal justice, about the fact that there's a massive postcode lottery with some of these programmes. And I'll use New Chance as the ultimate example, because that's about supporting vulnerable women away from criminal justice, many of whom are parents, many of whom have problems with addiction, domestic abuse and mental health, all very solvable, very well evaluated programme. Referrals once were all right, and then they reduced. There's a number of other things that present big opportunities, like restorative justice, CARA, even NHS liaison and diversion within custody. So some of this is working really well, and some of it is UK leading, but we're not getting the coverage we need. The referrals are inconsistent. A lot of frontline officers I meet never heard of any of them. Every now and again they've heard of one or two. And I know you know this, and I know there's a plan to improve it, but I think I've raised this probably in about 40 different ways over almost 3 years now, and I just don't feel like there's the urgency to really maximise some of these things you've already successfully been party to make sure that they don't wither away and die, that some people don't come into custody, they are absolutely ideal for this and then just get missed. So for all the talk of trauma-informed coalitions and things, there's some stuff that already works right on the doorstep that isn't being used. And I know there seems to be a real agreement about the importance of these and belief in them, but where's the urgency to get, because I just really don't want to come to another board and raise the same point. I just feel, can there be more urgency? Do you think you are treating it with the urgency it deserves?
You asking?
I think I should answer that. I know we've spoken about it a lot before. We are very, very open and engaging with regards to trying to eliminate some of that inconsistency. And I've shared with you some of my thoughts around how we do some of that stuff. Particularly looking forward to a bit of a sort of show and tell event to try and improve levels. I think we have a gap in the market with regards to understanding, with regards to urgency. There are a lot of things that are urgent. The most urgent was landing the change to the policing model and improving our performance in a number of areas, which we're well on with, as you're very well briefed. I think the bottom line is we need to do a bit more. And I've said that to you privately, and I'm saying that publicly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess all I would say is the reason I such strongly emphasise these, because I know they do tie into your priorities. They're so cost-cutting anyway. Now, it's all about reducing your demand for those people who can be worked with, and then frees up your time for people who still need to go to prison because they're a safety risk and so on. So I'll probably keep on banging at the drum. But if we can make progress on this, there's a quick win to reduce vulnerability. It is a quick win because they're already there. We know they work. So it's a massive prize to be had quickly. That's why I'm so kind of manic about it. So thanks for your assurance, Chief.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions. At paragraph 4C on page 3, the report refers to care homes and pupil referral units as drivers of violence and exploitation, and that these sit within the hotspots. However, what work's being done with care homes and the pupil referral units to address them being identified as drivers of violence, and to safeguard young people within the care homes and those who are attending pupil referral units who are victims or potential victims of criminal exploitation?
So it says care homes, I think you mean children's care setting because it's serious youth violence, isn't it?
Yes, well, the reference is to care homes.
So there'll be a lot of work going on locally, as I described earlier. Each local policing area is responsible for delivering against it and working in that priority space with community safety partnership. I can't speak for every single area, but if that is an issue in a particular location, it will be being worked through. We have schools intervention and prevention officers who are aligned in particular to some of the pupil referral units and do a lot of work in those spaces, as do our young persons officers in all of the partnership teams. Absolutely a focus. We are starting to embed something called the Philomena principles as well, which is very much working with care facilities and unregulated kind of care settings around their responsibilities when young people go missing, so that they don't just kind of phone the police and try and pass it to us, but how do you act as a parent in that moment rather than kind of an agency. So there is lots of work going on across all of the areas sat within local delivery plans, because we recognise that this is where some of our challenges come from. I don't know whether Sarah and Tony wanted to add anything kind of further.
What was that statistic, Tony, that was on the report that Ziva? Like 1% of children are in the criminal justice system, but 59% of those are children who experienced care, which is massive.
Yeah.
So that was this week. We shared that email, wasn't it? So the VRP hasn't really done a huge amount of work with care leavers up until now, but that did get me thinking. So I think there is more we need to do. We took to the strategic safeguarding meeting last week the ambition to implement the which there was general support for. So we're just monitoring that now in terms of making sure that on the ground that gets delivered. And also there has been some concerns around the use of unregulated settings for vulnerable young people. The regulations have changed from September or October. All settings will need to be registered with Ofsted, so that will bring the quality of provision up, but it will also cause us some problems because we know the appetite of current providers in the West Midlands has been low in terms of registering and wanting to be part of that. We know the placement market for children in care is broken. There's just not the level of provision that's needed for the complexity of young people that are coming through the system. There's a huge amount to do, but I think it's an area we've not really done a lot on as a VRP. Obviously, local safeguarding boards, it's going to be a massive priority for each of the local areas, and safeguarding boards in terms of supporting children in care. But we will, I think that's an area we as a VRP need to do more.
I think just to come back on it, we talked about, or certainly colleagues talked about, the relationship between community safety and safeguarding locally. It is in our strategy, and I do talk to our commander colleagues about our role locally in terms of ensuring that the safeguarding approaches don't just look at familial settings, which is kind of the traditional approach, but that we ensure that safeguarding in the contextual setting, which is where a lot of our serious youth violence happens as a result of exploitation, drugs, etc., that is also a focus. So that's something that we talk about as commanders regularly, and we've got a massive role in the safeguarding boards locally to nudge that. I certainly have those conversations in Sandline, and it was one of the first things I discussed with the chief exec of the Children's Trust on my first day in post at the beginning of July to get that assurance that we've got those approaches in place locally.
No, thank you. I'll come back to you, Kath, if that's okay. My next question is about paragraphs 15 and 16 in the report, because there's reference to the multi-agency response that took place in the summer of 2022 in order to mitigate the risk of a summer violence spike, and that this work's continued into the summer of 2023. And that model's been promoted, I believe, across the regional partnership, with each local violence prevention lead briefed on the summer violence spikes and encouraged to develop a plan to mitigate risks in their local areas. We're now into September, so do we have any information available as yet as to how effective this multi-agency response was over the summer of 2023 at preventing and reducing youth violence?
So anecdotally, the feedback that I've had is that it's the Holiday Activities Fund, isn't it, that you're describing in the response to that. Anecdotally, always really, really well received and provides those spaces to ensure that we don't have vulnerable people out. I haven't got any specifics on each area to kind of help explain that, but we're still reducing in terms of our numbers of serious youth violence. So it is playing a part of all of the things that are in place in the system.
Didn't see the predicted spike,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, the role that we play is recognising that there is multiple sets of provision through lots of different funding streams, and Birmingham is the area we focus our effort on as a VRP. And it's about how we at a really early stage bring those providers together to really look at where we need to deploy the resources in the most cost-effective way, so that we haven't got detached youth workers falling over each other because they haven't spoken to each other, but we've actually got not only for the providers to be working in a way that is having the most impact, but also we create an app which enables whether it's police officers on the beat or others to understand what's where, so they can do that signposting if they come across young people, or young people can look at where the activities are that they might want to access. So I think the process and the approach is good. It's not one that we've cracked across the 7 areas, and across the 7 areas it's all different anyway, because not all areas have got as much provision potentially as is available across Birmingham because of the sheer scale and size of Birmingham. But it is an approach that we do promote in terms of that early planning and early thinking.
Okay, thank you. My third question is at paragraph 28 of the report, and I think it probably will be you, Sarah. Because I'm sure it will be a matter of serious concern to young people, schools and providers that have benefited from the Step Together programme. The Home Office funding finished at the end of the 22-23 academic year. However, our VRP has stepped in and is to be commended for having stepped in to provide additional funding to commit that funding for existing routes until the end of December 2023. And the VRP, I believe, are also leading discussions around local funding for future sustainability. What reassurance are you able to provide, if any, as to the future sustainability of the Step Together programme in West Midlands?
So our educational leads are leading conversations in each of the 7 areas with the different agencies, collectively with the different agencies, to really make sure that they understand where their Step Together routes are, what they are, how much they cost, any potential impact information that they've got around those routes, and that they don't get to January and say, we didn't know that there was no funding for that after December. It's really important for us over the next, well, we've been doing it over the last 3 months, but over the next 3 months, that we start to understand where there is going to be continued buy-in and sustainability around those routes. We've already had Walsall agree to fund 2 of their routes, which I think is good, because I think once one area starts doing it, other areas start to follow that trend. Birmingham, we've got quite a few routes. I don't know number-wise off the top of my head. We know the position Birmingham resource-wise, so it's unknown as to which areas are going to be able to sustain their routes going forward, but it won't be through lack of encouragement and discussion facilitated through the VRP in terms of trying to get that impact understood and sustainability locally. Very expensive service. It's £500,000 for 3 months for a term, which is it's a lot of money for certainly for the VRP to sustain that within the budgets we have. But if you if you chisel that down to a local route and then you put education, police, local authority, other members, businesses around the table, it's not it's not a significant amount if you were to proportion that out. And they're the sorts of conversations we're having.
Thank you very much. Kath, you want to just come back?
Yeah, just quickly. So HMOs, houses and multi-occupancy, who purport to provide additional services for vulnerable people, and also to help transition children from the care environment into the communities. They're a bit of an epicentre of problems, or have been in the community. Is there any plan about looking at them, with the oversight you have for violence under 25s, or some of the work that you've been doing, because they kind of are locations where individuals who should be coming into focus anyway will already be identified. So it's more about managing those locations.
Yeah, and I can assure you from a neighbouring perspective, every neighbourhood officer will know exactly where their HMOs are, because we do get those kind of calls and we recognise that kind of vulnerability. In terms of an analytical perspective, where we see most of our serious youth violence is where we target most of our resources on the street, so after school and into the nighttime economy, or where we mainly see it. But you are right, they are challenging locations, but that would be a local neighbourhood team through their LPA kind of model to understand what's going on there and put a problem solving approach in around that particular location. But it's not something that I've brought into the kind of strategic view around serious youth violence in particular.
Just one final question. So when individuals or companies apply to the council for to change the use of properties to become a HMO, do the police or VIU have a view? Are they asked for any view by the council?
Certainly our crime prevention team, a gentleman called Mark Sylvester, who may have been here in the past, he does see those applications with his kind of local team, and they would look at the kind of information and, if appropriate, put the relevant opposition into that kind of planning application. That does happen, and I've been part of that, particularly in Dudley when they were looking to kind of expand and bring some additional HMOs in, and we really do try and use the legislation available to prevent that because of the challenges that you described that it brings, but very much run through Mark Sylvester's crime prevention team.
I think in view of time, we'll need to draw this agenda item to a conclusion. However, just remains for me to say thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Kim Medill and Acting Chief Inspector Tony Eustace, and our BRP Director Sarah Roach, for attending this morning and presenting your report and also transferring our questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much. There's no one single cause and there's no one single response that will prevent, tackle and reduce serious youth violence. This report is an illustration of a wide-ranging action that's taking place across the West Midlands by West Midlands Police, by Violence Reduction Partnership and partners to prevent, tackle and reduce serious violence. And that includes operational policing activity through targeted Guardian patrols in 57 hotspot areas, together with work that's focused on prevention, early intervention, diversion and addressing the underlying causes of serious youth violence. We're delivering education in schools, the community initiative to reduce violence, a multi-agency response to mitigate summer violence, harnessing the positive influences of our faith communities and sport, supporting children impacted by parental imprisonment, the Custody in Reach programme, targeted resettlement programmes, the implementation of the serious violence duty, development of a youth assembly and much more. In the West Midlands, we are united in our commitment to constant and unremitting action to prevent, tackle and reduce serious youth violence, protect people and save lives. Agenda item 7 is increased confidence in West Midlands Police, access to police services. And this agenda item is to be presented by Chief Superintendent Ian Parnell. We're asking that the presentation report please be kept to about 3 minutes in order to enable maximising the opportunity for discussion on the basis that we've all read the paper and it's available to the public to read if they care to do so. So could you please kindly present your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, members. So I was posted into Force Contact as head of department in December 2022. And we talk a lot about trust and confidence in policing. But for my department, this means answering the phones and answering the calls for service in a timely fashion and being able to be there for members of the public when they need us most. I think it is fair to say that prior to December, the previous 2 years, we had let members of the community down with our service, and the Chief Constable provided me with an absolutely clear mandate, improvements that needed to be made. First of all, we need to improve how we would respond to a major or critical incident should that occur, and ensure our command and control capability was able to be delivered in light of the learning from the Greater Manchester inquiry. Secondly, that we have a timely response to answering calls for service, whether that's 999, 101 or online reporting. And thirdly, that we respond to incidents and calls for service from the public in a timely way and get to those incidents quicker to support victims, arrest offenders and provide justice. We've developed a really clear programme of work over the last 6 months to show some significant improvements in these areas. In terms of 999, our ambition is that in line with national objectives, we answer 90% of 999 calls within 10 seconds. I can confirm that 999 calls will always be prioritised by West Midlands Police, given the increased risk and harm that sits within those call types. During the last quarter, we've achieved national status as a top 5 force, and this is likely to continue for the remainder of the year. And what's been really important to note in this area is that our average time to answer 999 is now well under 8 seconds, and we are consistently having low abandonments. We previously used to be a force that required support from other forces in terms of 999 at times of high demand. We are now in a position where we are supporting other forces nationally as part of the national infrastructure, and only last week we supported a regional force when they hit an RT phone. In terms of 101, our ambition is to answer 80% of 101 calls within 3 minutes. This is our non-emergency line. Our performance improvements in this area were always going to come slightly behind our 999, which we prioritise for the reasons I described before. But we're now in a position that our average time to answer for 101 is below 3 minutes. And in August 2023, 74.3% of calls were answered in under 3 minutes. But what is key here is the numbers of abandoned calls that are reducing significantly from over 40,000 a month to under 5,000. There's still some work to be done in this area, but we're keen to push on. And then finally, in terms of our channels of contact, we have a number of online channels where members of the community contact us. We receive about 50,000 calls per month via our live chat channel. We have a service level agreement of answering those calls within 15 minutes, and we are regularly now answering those calls under 11 minutes. Members of the public have an ability to report low-level, high-volume crime via our online instant reporting mechanism on the website. These are offences such as theft, criminal damage, or making off without payment. And we have a service level agreement to answer these requests within 24 hours, and we are consistently below those levels at the moment. And finally, in terms of online reporting, in April this year, we introduced the ability, as per national agreement, to report crimes via police.uk website. This includes domestic abuse, missing persons and sexual offences. We have approximately 400 reports per month via police.uk, and our service level agreement is to deal with these incidents within 12 hours, and we're currently processing those within 8 at the moment. So all 3 channels of service at the moment are improving, and will continue to improve as we move into the new year. What I would say at this point, though, the Commission and board members, is that 80% of calls for service into West Midlands Police do not result in a resource being dispatched. And so the majority of those calls and those online chats are still resolved at point of first contact. Finally, just in terms of next steps and moving forward, we have 2 significant change programmes that are in train at the moment. One of them is the Force Contact Optimisation project. That is very much focused around technology, improving processes and systems. And the next generation Force Contact is around our new operating model and the move to a single site. Both projects are showing good progress. And once again, Commissioner, just to put on record my thanks for the provision of the car park for the staff that will be working from our C3 site. In terms of those projects, I'm pleased to report that we will be up and running over the next 3 months, and that should assist in delivering those sustained increases in performance that we've started to see that we need to continue and provide in terms of service to the public. I will pause there for any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. Do you have any comments, questions on matters arising? Yes, Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thanks for the report. So it's a bit of a random question, but I promised to ask it because it arose in a community meeting, and I actually thought it was a clever idea. I'm sure it's not super easy to establish, but I think it's worth consideration. Obviously, a big element of confidence in WMP is that feedback loop that you're acting on it. And I know there's been all sorts of efforts to do that, intensification weeks of social media activity, which I think has been excellent, actually. And you'll always be criticised because you can't reach everybody and not everyone will know, so it can't be perfect. But a neat little idea that was presented was there's a proportion of people that they won't see social media, they're not going to get a leaflet through their door and they just won't see you. And they might be, you know, stereotypically older generations, they might be kind of feeding in intelligence still. And because they don't hear back, then they might not report it as much and there's a bit of frustration. And I have heard a lot of people say they've given up, notwithstanding the new investment in 101 and everything. The suggestion was that there's a willing bank of volunteers that would be happy to be vetted and whatever else that is, you know, appropriate security, that could help in providing feedback to people. So obviously, provided you're confident about certain levels of sensitivity and about the kinds of things they fed back on, to help provide that feedback loop. If the challenge at the moment is mainly one of capacity and people power, but I know it's not an easy fix that because you still have to supervise and how do they access the systems. But is that something that resonates at all in your mind and worthy of exploration?
So the process that we follow is let's answer the phones first of all,
Yeah.
and provide that service. Once we've cracked that, we move on to responding to the incidents as timely as we can. Once we've achieved that, the third stage is to provide a quality of service, and part of the feedback is an important element of that. So happy to pick up a discussion offline and understand how that could work within a contact environment. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is from board member Kath Hannon.
Hello, Hen. Good morning. Firstly, I think you've been a bit modest about the impact and change that's happened within call handling and your leadership there. I mean, if you just look at the abandoned calls, they've gone from the 999s, 49,000 down to 85, and for the 101s, 41,000 down to 5,000. So that's a tremendous amount of change and hopefully increase satisfaction with people phoning there. Could you explain what that change might be? I know some of it must be money and resources, and if so, how long can that continue? Because at some point that, you know, there's got to be some management of that. And if I can just refer you to the performance data at the end of the report. So P5s are 0 for the 999 and the 101s, and the P5s are resolutions without deployment. I know once they get to the initial investigation team, there's a lot of resolution there, but I'm just wondering why those are all 0s. And then the last question is that on the P9s, which are about points, they're you know, relatively high, 40–50%. I noticed that there's been a change to how theft from the person is going to be managed, and rather than that being crimed, it's going to be scrutinised and looked at and maybe P9'd, you know, following on from that scrutiny. Could you give an explanation of why that course of action needs to be taken? You know, theft is a relatively straightforward definition to manage, so I guess there must be some other circumstances around that can be explained as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So just taking each one of those points in turn. What have we done? Well, we've stripped it back to basics. So it's understanding your business, knowing the detail, understanding the skills and capability of your workforce. We had resourcing gaps. We know now when we have peaks in demand, and we resource appropriately to that. So part one has been a significant uplift in resource. provided through the change programme, supported by the Chief Constable. An extra 66 call handlers are now available to take calls. So we've had to recruit those, and that takes some time. So we have contracted the recruitment process as far as possible. Staff, employed candidates will now attend an assessment centre and get a offer in principle at the conclusion of that assessment centre. So we've reduced the timeline for recruitment. And whilst that's been taking place, we've put in a number of measures in order to bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be with numbers. So that has included the establishment of a bank scheme, very similar to what you'd see in the NHS, where we advertise on overtime, peak time working that police staff or police officers can take up from across the force. Force contact is quite unique in that if I was head of homicide command or I was head of public order command, if there was a riot or if there was a significant murder, I could call upon resources both from across force and nationally to support me. Within contact, I'd only got what I'd got. And so what we've built up over the last 6 months is some resilience across force. And so we have a number of colleagues now that we can call upon at times of need and bring them in to support my staff in delivering service. So that was the first point. Secondly, this is about leadership, grip and understanding. And so this is taking it back to basics, empowering supervisors to be visible and present on the shop floor, supporting staff, challenging whether they're ready status on calls, monitoring individual agent activity, being really clear on our training regime, being really clear on our standards and our priorities. And we've done this with the support of a lot of IT that's enabled us to have some real-time understanding of that performance that's coming in there and then. And you cannot wait when you get surging calls, you've got to react immediately. So it's a combination of all these things that's led to the improvements in service. Moving on to the P5 data, we are currently, I need to take this away and get you a detailed answer on why P5 is showing at 0. But what I would say is that we are currently reviewing how our appointment system is managed and delivered across force. There are far too many people involved in that at the moment, and what we need to be able to offer at that first point of contact is what the victim wants in terms of service. So if that's an appointment right now immediately, we need to be able to transfer to somebody that can deal with that. If it's on their terms and it's in 3 or 4 days, then that needs to be on their terms as well. At the moment, we have an arbitrary 72 hours that we apply for P5 appointments. I think working closely with investigation colleagues, we need to develop and understand clearly what that service offer needs to look like. And the Deputy Chief Constable has been very clear in terms of what he expects in terms of that. P9 is really important to force contact because an incident that's closed to P9 is an incident that's been resolved internally without the need for any further support. And so we monitor levels of P9 very carefully. The more incidents that we can resolve without having to dispatch a resource means that the more resources are available to deal with the incidents that really require physical police attendance. In terms of theft from person, we have a significant number of reports that are not genuine theft from person offences. We have a number of reports where people are seeking a crime number for the purposes of insurance, or they're reporting a loss inappropriately in order to quite often receive recompense for a mobile telephone or other small electronic item. So we still have an obligation to accurately record crime within 24 hours, and we continue to do that. But what we've done is we've put an extra layer of scrutiny around theft from person offences, because we know this is a particular type of offence that is often open to abuse in reporting. We have changed our force internet site so that when people want to report a mobile phone loss or theft, it directs you to the right point. And we can say with a high degree of confidence now that an officer will review every case where a theft from person of a mobile phone in particular is reported. But obviously there's a balance to be had there in terms of making sure that we provide the right service and that we record crime accurately as soon as possible.
So how will you differentiate between somebody losing and there being an actual theft without then having to direct staff to make investigations, which obviously takes time away from other work that we should be doing.
So I won't share all the tips of the
Okay.
trade in here, but there are trigger factors that would
Yeah.
indicate that it's a false report. I'll give a couple. I won't give them all, but the timeliness between loss and reporting is one of them. The lack of independent evidence or witnesses is another, and there's about 12 trigger factors that you've got that would indicate that it's more likely to be a loss or a false report than an actual offence. And investigators are trained to understand what these trigger factors are.
And tagged into that then, is there going to be some communication to the wider public that these changes are there and there's going to be more scrutiny, which indeed might help reduce the telephone calls in the first place?
It's absolutely all on the website. What we do experience, if we have a concert, for example, we often see an increase in reports of theft as a result of a concert. Some of this is related to organised crime and targeted pickpocketing. Other parts are related to people jumping up and down and enjoying themselves and losing their phone and then reporting it. And so we're able to link in with our licensing team and our local policing teams, understand when we see surges in demand around phone theft and phone loss.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Jonathan Jardine, Chief Executive.
Thanks. It's a completely different line of questioning. I would, thinking about technology trends and how they're going to affect the service. When there is a greater expectation now of the use of video calls by whether it's the GPs or everyone else and have that technology, it is now straightforward for people to take footage of incidents and in either lifetime share them or in retrospectively share them. How do you think these technology trends will affect the contact service, and what sort of response is the force making to them?
So we are already making adaptations to meet this change in the way of reporting. I would just start though by saying that the majority of people still prefer the traditional routes of calling and contacting West Midlands Police. Whilst I would expect to see an increase in online reporting and our ability to respond to online reporting, the vast majority of calls still come through 999. So there are a number of initiatives that are in progress at the moment. We have a domestic abuse desk. The domestic abuse desk is able to provide video calling with victims to improve the quality of service that we provide to them following the domestic incidents. What we've seen from the pilot so far, and PPU colleagues will be able to provide more detail on this, is that there is a far lower attrition rate through the criminal justice system, and there's a far better engagement with victims when we engage in video rapid response at an early stage. That's one initiative that's in place. The same technology is also going to be piloted within our control rooms to provide our dispatch teams with situational awareness and our commanders with situational awareness of what's going on. This will allow them to better coordinate resources to incidents and understand exactly how they need to direct the right people to the right place. Within our investigation teams, they already have established ways of uploading doorbell footage or uploading CCTV real time so that the investigation can have sight of the digital evidence at the earliest possible stage. And some of the work that we're doing with our partners Axon and with our digital evidence store will continue to add to these areas. Not my area of expertise, so apologies if I haven't been able to go into detail that you wanted. That's just a little bit of insight into the way that we're adapting to the new ways of technology and the new ways of reporting.
Thank you. In view of time, we will have to draw this agenda item to a conclusion. However, Chief Superintendent Ian Parnell, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for the presentation of your report and for answering our questions. Much appreciated. Building trust and confidence in policing is essential, because if people do not have trust and confidence in policing, it will not be possible to deliver an effective and efficient police service. Access to police services is a necessary part of building trust and confidence in policing and people's satisfaction with the service they receive. And that includes both in relation to the time it takes for people to access the service and, of course, in connection with the quality of the service that is provided. And for far too long and far too often, despite the hard work of police officers and staff, West Midlands Police was not complying with either its own Citizens Charter or the required service level agreements in relation to the service provided by Force Contact, and in particular the answering of 999 and 101 calls. However, as a consequence of the Force Contact Optimisation Project, investment in innovation, hard work on the part of officers and staff, and the oversight and scrutiny that I have been providing, there's been a significant improvement in performance. And since April 2023, West Midlands Police has met the required national standard for answering 999 calls. There's also been significant improvement in 101 performance. However, I will continue to hold West Midlands Police to account to ensure that it continues to drive continuous improvement, both in relation to force contact calls for service and force response to incidents, to ensure that it complies with service level agreements and it delivers a service that the people of the West Midlands are entitled to. Thank you very much. Agenda item 8 is performance update, and this agenda item is to be presented by Chief Superintendent Tom Joyce, and we're asking that the presentation please be kept to about 3 minutes in the interests of enabling us to have some opportunity for discussion, and on the basis that the report has been read and is available to the public if they want to read it. So could you please kindly present your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Fortunately, quite a few of the points within the report have been touched on at various stages today, so I'll try and pick out the bits that probably haven't had so much attention. Important to point out that the last time this paper was presented, the baseline comparison was only June 2019. That's now been updated to compare to the calendar year for 2019, which is a slight amendment there. First data point of comparison then is the volume of homicides in the West Mids, which is relatively stable in sort of recent years, and critically is on par with the baseline year. So we've had 43 homicides in the period from August 22 to July 23. That's pretty much in line with most of the group forces and kind of similar to general trends across the country. Unsurprisingly, the kind of factors that are driving homicide rates are to a degree domestic related, quite a high proportion drugs and OCG related, and now obviously alcohol. Quite high proportion, about 70% of the victims are under the age of 25. So picking up on some of the questions earlier from the City Commissioner around organised criminality, there's clearly some element of that involved. I won't go to great depth around reducing serious violence metric, but one thing just to draw out, the question earlier was, are we having an impact? Well, the baseline comparison, we have seen a reduction of about 20 offences compared to 2019. It notes in the report that the recorded crime is showing as a 3% increase for that period. First and foremost, that's a slightly broader category that is considered from the hospital admission perspective. But it's also important to note that we actually had a CDI improvement in between now and baseline. So we actually had about 15% increase in recorded violence compared to 2019 as a result of 2021 improvement work. So that 3% actually, when you take that into account, is probably in line with what we're seeing from the hospital admission point of view. I won't go to any of the broad detail around that just because I know you had an input on solicited by Guardian and so on already. Just to show, however, the fire officers' charges have continued to reduce compared to the last reporting period, and the actual usage tends to be the same. So there's still shotguns being the most prominent use of firearms. Recoveries in the most recent period are at 72, slight reduction compared to the previous reporting period, but of note, half of recoveries over the first quarter of this financial year, which mirrors a lot of our performance improvements since the instigation of the new operating model, where we're seeing improvements across arrests, detection, and so on since April onwards. I won't go into too much detail around Caterpillar unless people have particular questions about it afterwards. And likewise, I'll not touch on some of the remaining data around Guardians. I think Kim and Sarah between us will cover most of that. Just to move on then to disrupting drug supply in county lines, and this has seen drug offending seen a significant increase in the last 12 months compared to the baseline. Probably important to recognise that identifying drugs is usually the result of proactive work. So actually, the fact that we have a significant increase is probably in part due to the implementation of things like the County Lines Task Force and the increase in proactive work since April in the new operating model. The County Lines Task Force, I think, is probably worthy of some mention because it's quite a significant investment of resource. And going back to the Commissioner's question around what involvement is there around the vehicle certainly there are proportions of young people being tasked to commit vehicle crime. The establishment of the County-Lines Task Force has given rise to Operation Sky Clash and Operation Ferrari, both of which are designed to tackle particularly young people being involved in county-line activity. Sky Clash is a particularly success story, I think, in terms of bringing together multi-agency support for people being drawn into county lines. In terms of broader neighbourhood crimes, there's a reduction in burglary, which is probably partially driven by changes in burglary patterns because of the lockdown and pandemic, which sees more people doing home working. But it's also worth noting that our outcome rate for burglary is increasing, so we're actually detecting more of those offences. Although robbery is largely static, again, we've seen some significant increases in detections around robbery. And you've already had some input on vehicle crime in terms of the kind of obfuscation that the chief mentioned earlier. Just to pick up on the theft in the person question around the new kind of measures to try and divert suspicious reporting. One thing I would say is we have had the Force Crime Registrar do a review of that just to make sure that we are maintaining our CDI accuracy. And so certain measures in place to make sure that we are denying genuine victims a good crime level when they need one. Antisocial behaviour and volume of incidents has reduced in the last 12 months compared to the baseline, and we're probably seeing an increase in crime reporting of offences and harassment type offences as a substitution for those incidents. And we touched briefly on the satisfaction, kind of at the last point with Ian's update around the improvements in call handling and force contact. There is obviously some reference there to the latest Barclay survey, Recruitment Wales, showing what's going to be below national average perceptions. The police do a good job, but that's probably important to point out that a lot of that was before the new operating model. And there are some discussions around how we would get a kind of slightly improved understanding of what the current level of confidence are, using both internal pathways and survey groups and also some external commission stuff. I think we'll be bringing a report to you in due course on that to recommendations. And then the final point is around tackling cybercrime. So clearly, cybercrime tends to be both a regional, national and transnational phenomenon. So it's not always the case that our offenders are actually in the West Midlands area. So a lot of the direction comes from national infrastructure. There's quite a lengthy update in there. The thing I would draw out is the Operation Henhouse, Operation Henhouse 2, and soon to be Operation Henhouse 3, where the local work that is going on, coordinated nationally, tends to focus on things like money laundering. So those people who use their bank accounts or allow their bank accounts to be used for personal fraud by third parties, and also targeting offenders that do happen to live within the West Midlands police area, even if they offend outside of jurisdiction. So that is kind of the main performance update. And I'll pause if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Just before I open it up for questions, my first question is in relation to paragraph 8 of the report. There's reference there to between 1st of August 2022 and 31st of July 2023, West Midlands Police recorded 98 lethal barrelled firearms discharges, which is a reduction of 50 when compared to the 12 months period prior to this, when there were 148 lethal barrelled firearms discharges. To what would you attribute that reduction to, would you say?
I think probably a significant portion of those discharges would have been connected to gang tensions in places like Birmingham, so particularly to groups like the Armed Response Group and their rivals. There have been a number of sort of neighbourhood-led and covert investigative operations running that have sought to tackle those disputes, civilian involuntary, quite a significant reduction in discharges is down to that gang tackling.
So effective prevention, tackling and reducing crime via operations by West Midlands Police.
Yes.
Thank you.
Our appetite, Commissioner, on the back of that, I think just to come in, is definitely one whereby we are seeking every sort of lawfully audacious opportunity to remove firearms off the streets. And also in response to a discharge, we are increasingly charging a number of people with the new model, particularly around major crime. And if you charge early on the back of a discharge, you prevent those consequential effects much more. So that plays into it as well. But I think the prevention is a huge step forward.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Bhupinder, and then Tom, and then Kat.
Thank you. Just very, very briefly, paragraph 29. Antisocial behaviour, it's been reduced by 10,059 incidents in the last 12 months. However, it will be now crowded as public order offences, which has increased by 12,454. Is that a government recommendation that we wanted to now start criming ASP as public order? Does that come from government?
It's not really a new direction. I think if you have a course of conduct over time, the harassment legislation has always been there. So if someone's seeking to cause someone else harassment like distress, so for repeated incidents, should be recorded as a crime. Similarly, a lot of the stuff that is kind of occurs in the neighbourhood in terms of shouting in the street, there's a fine line between behaviour that is just antisocial and behaviour that's criminal. The critical bit is actually making sure when we go, we recognise the difference between a crime and a non-crime incident. There's been a lot of emphasis on improving our recording of those things. So it's probably more, again, about us being better at acknowledging crimes that occurred and making sure they're recorded.
Yeah, I'd take that on board, but what I'm saying, is that something, is it a government direction that said that we'd like you to crime it like this from now on?
Yeah, sorry, it's a CDI recommendation. So it's a national thing. So crime data integrity has driven us to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, I think you're next and then Cam.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on your question actually about kind of the success at tackling some of the organised crime, that might be behind use of firearms. What is that the culmination of long-term work, or is that about a change in what you're doing that makes it more effective?
Well, that's a bit of both really, because we haven't just started doing this. We've been doing it for a long time. But I think the emphasis, certainly from my perspective and direction, has been around. We've got a good number of firearms resources. We've got them deployed against the right threats. I sign authorities for all kinds of intrusive surveillance, which I'm very happy to do and push. And on top of that, we've got a good prevention model with Guardian, with a model of local neighbourhood policing where we're getting a bit more intelligence and getting on the back of it quicker. And when we do have a discharge, we've got a structure in place which quickly picks up the job and sort of pushes it more towards a prosecution quicker than it did in the past. So all those things come into play. But the main emphasis is, we treat it as a priority, and wherever there is an opportunity, we're on it. And if you look at the investments that we've made in some of the other areas, such as road crime, very quickly will be coming online. They've done the interviews, the people are in place, we've got the vehicles, a little bit more on the traffic side of things. And that it's restricting organised crime groups' ability to operate in a slightly different way. So we're targeting the cash, targeting them on the road. And of course, if there is a discharge, we are sort of surging a little bit more around them to promote a prosecution. And you can see that in a lot of the charges that have come recently.
So what you say there makes sense in terms of, I understand literally what you're describing. What was happening to the resource before? But is this just we're doing it, if you're being blunt about it, we're doing it better? Or is it a change of approach, which might mean we lose something we were trying to do before with that resource, but you still think that's the right thing to do? Or is it just we're using the resources better?
I think it's mainly we're using the resources better. But remember, we've done a lot of recruitment. And as you get more experience in your front end, you get a little bit more streetwise, you get a little bit more proactive. And then on top of that, you've got a structure in place now, which really does sort of tease those issues out so you can really focus in a better way than we did in the past. So better to prevent, but better to detect, and even better at local conversations to pick the intelligence up to go and proactively cause them some harm.
Thank you. Cam, I think you're next.
Thank you. So tackling cybercrime, paragraph 35 refers to over £30 million worth of fraud in 5 months, which is a significant number. But within that, it talks about response volunteers, recruiting volunteers to kind of assist in this area. If you'd be able to give us a bit more information about who and how that's working. And also regarding the money mules. How do we know that's a problem? How do we know what West Midlands is doing is actually tackling it? And it specifically mentions schools, but are there other establishments that are involved in that? For example, universities, which I would think are a more likely kind of age group for being involved in that sort of activity.
So as I think some of the reporting around this, we might bring about more detail because there's a lot of this international and ROCU organised, but in terms of the very specific questions around mules, for example, it's subject to sufficient activity reports tend to be driving the identification at national level of accounts that we should then go and do interventions with. So, for example, the PCSOs are being trained to help go and talk to people about not allowing your account to be used. And then when we do the hen house activity, we send officers out to actually visit for either enforcement or diversion purposes. Those people who SARS are identified as needing a visit. The emphasis really is on there's a mixture of prevention for vulnerable victims, prevention for people who might be used as money mules, and then to a lesser degree, us doing enforcement. So a lot of it, as I say, is a national ROCU-led approach.
Just on the back of that, there was some discussion about an illicit cash team within the region, and the money was taken away. And I've invested, and the Commissioner has supported that in having a team just in the West Midlands to do that. So that's more of a sort of ROCU level approach, force level approach to this. But in response to your question, where have we found that out? Lots of that intel has come from the work that they've been doing on county lines, because there's a load of overlap. So these aren't like massive amounts of cash. It's more the younger person being used, you know, as the end product because they've got a bank account, because they're 16, because they've got a PayPal account, etc., etc. It's that type of intelligence that has informed some of this stuff. But with regards to the sort of the impact of fraud, etc., we have kept the resources in there at a regional level, and we've kept the resources in there at a force level as well. The thing that will change with fraud and keeps changing, I think, is the ability of more people to be able to just facilitate it online and from their own bedroom. So rather than it being a sort of crime that was a little bit more selective, it's become a crime which certainly has got little touches of opportunity across a range of potential offenders. And that's changed over time, and I think will continue to change.
And the volunteer roles within that arena?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what that is. So I'll come back to you about that.
Thank you. Just in view of time, we've got two final quick questions. Mine, one from myself and one from Tom. So mine is in connection with paragraph 18, because there's a reference there to drug offending having increased over the past 12 months when compared to the national baseline. And why do you think that's been the case, and what action is West Midlands Police taking to prevent that or reduce that drug-related offending?
Well, again, as I kind of mentioned before, I think the thing about drug offending is you don't tend to get reporting around it the same way. It tends to be uncovered by proactive policing. So if you've got a county lines task force that's pursuing intelligence, then they will, by definition, identify more examples of trafficking. If you've got a local policing model where there's kind of greater emphasis on pursuing intelligence, then you're more likely to target the drug dealers and the potential drug users who are driving aggressive crime. So I think it's not a question of trying to reduce that per se, because it's probably a side effect or a consequence of being more proactive about tackling crime.
Thank you. Tom, final question.
Thank you, Commissioner. So you mentioned before about you're pleased to see some of the multi-agency response to people you find being caught up and exploited into county lines and similar, which is great. Now, in previous boards over the years, we've had people come from the counter-terrorism world to talk about multi-agency responses to young people who are vulnerable to being exploited into terrorist activity. And the profiles of those young people often being very, very similar to those caught up. And I've always been worried that we've got really effective work going on in that space or in the county line space, and the resource not being used together, even though we're trying to work with some similar cohorts of young people in terms of their exploitability. So it's kind of get your reflections on that, because what would be really bad is and I'm worried about this from a technological perspective as well in the CTE world, if they've got loads of resource, to provide really good wraparound support to those who could be being exposed to this terrorism as a prevention method. And then we're not maximising some of that resource, or we're duplicating it elsewhere, or not borrowing from it. Maybe I'm kind of looking at the wrong tree here, but
So no, slightly. So it's not a bad question, really. So in answer to the question, because I oversee it, particularly the CT stuff and the operations in particular of those that are targeted around the most serious of the threats, the resource that's available for that isn't a ubiquitous resource. So it would be nowhere near enough to sort of reach down into, the volume of policing that we're just talking about here on some of these things.
yeah.
But let me assure you that that resource is targeted around those that cause people most risk of death. That's the easiest way of explaining it. So it's a good resource. There isn't much of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very, very focused around the sort of the real top echelons of threat to the public that quite often, for obvious reasons, we don't talk about.
Yeah. So it's highly, it's specialised, it's effective,
Really
but
specialised,
highly
very
targeted.
effective, and will never touch into mainstream policing.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Tom Joyce. Thank you very much for attending today and for presenting the report and for answering our questions. It's much appreciated. Agenda item 9 is finance report and fees and charges update. And this agenda item is a joint office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and West Midlands Police report. It's to be presented by Pete Gillett, Director of Commercial Services. And we also have Lynn Joyce, who's Internal Audit Manager within the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. As ever, we're asking that the presentation be kept to about 3 minutes on the basis that we've read the report and it's available to members of the public and we can have an opportunity to ask some questions. So could you please kind of present the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Pete, really sorry to put in, sorry, Chair. Are we not going to look at the appendix for the policing plan and the performance there?
No, we've just agendaed this as a report from Westminster Police in connection with the response to the National Police crime performance. The 2 other papers you refer to are appendices to that report.
Okay, well, just quickly before we move on from there, there's been a real drought in data that's come from the police to be able to complete that board. In fact, some of it only arrived last night. And in addition, there's some targets within that don't exist at all. So maybe outside this meeting, we could have a discussion about how we might be able to improve that.
Definitely. Is that our report or is that a OPCC report?
It's the PCC report, but the data comes from West Midlands Police and there's been some real difficulties in uptaking that.
Well, we'll definitely pick our bit up if we've not done something.
Thank you very much.
We're down to just 4 now, Tom, aren't we, where there is still a request for information. We're working on those. There has been progress.
I think Kath wanted to about the metrics.
Yeah, and there's only 4 left now where we don't have the data for the metrics, but there is now activity underway to address those as best we can. So I can report on that, as you say, to the outside the meeting.
Okay, well, there's some questions I've got regarding that, so I'll forward them on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. We can do with those. Thank you. Returning then back to agenda item 9. Pete, do you
Commissioner, thank you. So hopefully,
present your report?
Hopefully colleagues will recognise this is a very consistent report to previous financial updates that the board have received, and hopefully fairly self-explanatory as well. I think it's a positive report overall. The headlines kind of as included are an underspend on the revenue budget based on the end of August spending position of £16.7 million against the annual budget of £695 million for the year. Commission, this is a managed underspend overall. It's driven primarily through savings in employee costs, the largest of which is police staff vacancies of £7 million. There are also underspends against police officer budgets. This is essentially due to phasing of new recruitment rather than specific vacancies in police officers. Indeed, from a police officer recruitment perspective, we are maintaining the uplift targets and also ensuring that we include the additional 100 police officer posts that have been allocated for the current year. The chief has also made a request into the Home Office specifically for additional posts in the current year. And we're waiting for an update from them, Commissioner, that you will receive, I think, in the chief by the end of the month. In addition to the kind of employee savings, the majority of which are effectively planned, we do have additional income in the current year of some £3.5 million. That's driven through Op Safeguard and some additional investment returns on our capital investments. Commissioner, the report absolutely confirms that we would continue with the approach that's based on our financial plans to use that underspend generated in the current year to carry forward into next financial year. This is a kind of a method and a tool that we used very effectively last financial year to support this current year's budget. That's really important that we have the ability to balance the budget, but also have the right amount of time to create sustainable savings on a permanent basis within that base budget. So actually the ability to use some shorter term monies whilst longer term savings are put in place, a really good practice. We ensure that every year when we set the budget against which we are monitoring, that we use third-party review of our assumptions, and the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy have done that for the current year and will do that for next year as well, and kind of recognise the approach we've taken as far as using that shorter term view to balance the budget while longer term savings are put in place are ones that absolutely do represent good practice. So that approach has worked well, as I've said, previous years and will do for current and future as well, and is contained within our medium-term financial planning approach. The capital forecast, Commissioner, is currently shown in line with budget. However, as you'll be aware, I think at this board meeting next month, we're bringing forward a review of the capital programme, and that should show some savings both in terms of the capital budget and the consequent revenue budget as well. Commissioner, with that introduction, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I open it up, I've got just 3 questions arising out of the finance report. So paragraphs 4, 5, 6 and 13, as you referenced in your opening, the force is currently forecasting a revenue outturn managed underspend, although personally I believe the more accurate term is cuts of £16.7 million. And that includes a forecast underspend, or rather cuts, of £3.8 million on PCSO pay, and a managed forecast underspend, or rather cuts of £6.9 million on police staff. Additional income has been achieved through the Operation Safeguard forecast at £3.5 million, and there's reference, of course, to the higher interest returns on short-term treasury management investments as well. West Midlands Police has also benefited as a consequence of the funding for the pay awards, which is a consequence of the prudent position budgeted for, has provided additional in-year flexibility of some £4 million. Now, I completely understand the need for careful and prudent budgeting as a consequence of the severe pressure that remains on the West Midlands Police budget. However, we know that PCSO numbers have been reduced to 328 against an establishment of 464. Now, members of the public might say, is it not the case that a proportion of that forecast underspend, for example, about 2.45 million, could return PCSO numbers to about 400, could prudently be invested in PCSOs and rebuilding community policing to provide preventative, proactive, problem-solving, visible policing out in the streets, keeping people, families, businesses and the local community safe and secure?
So thank you. I think the chief coming on that one. Thank you.
So I agree with some of your definitions with regards to the position financially. Those numbers are big numbers with regards to how much we are spending at the moment. That doesn't cover the cut that's required to bridge the gap. So in answer to part 2, operationally, that's not somewhere that I can go because we're still planning hard to try and meet we estimate to be a £30 million reduction that we've got to achieve. So that gives us a slight cushion and a slight run in with the following wind. And we're doing well in terms of trying to get ahead of that so we don't face a cliff edge. So you're right, it is a reduction and it is something that we have to respond to and plan for prudently. Yes, One could do what you're suggesting, but operationally and prudently from a financial perspective, I've still got more to find. We have been doing well. We've been doing well on the income side of things as well, with the safeguard, but we've still got more to do. I really wish it was a different position with our funding, you know, and especially when you look at the sort of the funding position for some of our forces that were compared to, you know, I did remark on the 999 data. There were a third more 999 calls in Greater Manchester Police, which is an indication of public need. And they start the position off with about £20 million more cash. If that was equalised, I don't think we'd be having this conversation, really, would we, in the same degree?
Yeah, no, thank you. My second question is in connection with paragraph 12 in the report. But why is it that the Home Office baseline of 7,909 is so important? We've recruited an additional 100 officers at the end of March. And what additional funding was provided to enable that 100 officer recruitment? And are there any realistic prospects of recruiting yet more police officers this year? And why might that be?
I feel like I'm doing the CFO's Commissioner, actually. So the answer to that question is nationally, that was the figure. And obviously Treasury had that amount of money to the Home Office, etc. And the apportionment was given based on the decisions that were made. In relation to that, though, some forces, i.e. the Metropolitan Police, couldn't meet that target for recruitment. So the money was still there and the policy ambition for 20,000 was still there. And as you know, we've been sort of knocking on the door saying, come on, we can do some more, because we are still 800 police officers down compared to the number we had in 2010. That's the most of any of the forces in England and Wales. So consequently, we've managed to take some of that, i.e. offer another 100, which has been to our benefit and to the community's benefit in the West Mids. And we've also written to the Home Office to say, if the Met don't hit their target again and there's any other additional available, we are in a position to take that slack. That's precisely the answer.
Thank you. And then my final question is at paragraph 18A, and you might choose to take this question as well, if you're comfortable, I don't know. But there is reference there to the investment of £3.78 million in relation to the additional laptop purchases that have been rolled out across the force. What's the reason for that investment in laptops, and what benefits and outcomes are expected as a consequence?
So it's just going to touch on this in my operational update. So I'll take that off the list, actually, Commissioner. We've just doing the rollout in Birmingham at the moment. Most police forces, most people that you employ need to be mobile. That gives greater efficiency, greater access to systems whilst you're actually at a job, rather than coming back to the police station to administer yourself. So it's really to try and push the mobility piece a lot more, which then links into efficiency, effectiveness. Also, the systems that are on there enable us to prevent and to detect more crime. So the intelligence system is on the laptop. You can take a statement on the laptop. You can get somebody to sign it digitally. You can press send and it goes to your colleague in the prisoner handling element to be able to interview the detainee. So all that is with a view to improving our efficiency and our effectiveness. But I think one of the big boosts that it will give the front end is it's a representation of the organisation investing in them. They've been asking for this for a long period of time, and it will make their jobs easier, which will make them more efficient and improve service to the public.
Thank you. We do have some time for at least one additional question if anybody wishes to contribute, but I don't see anybody else doing so. So in that case, we'll draw that agenda item to a close. Thank you very much.
Just one additional.
Yes.
Just to acknowledge, as you said in your introduction, clearly we've updated the fees and charges document that's associated with the financial report to reflect the recent pay award for police officers and police staff. So that's something that we'll then bring forwards following today's meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that is duly noted. Thank you very much. Yes, the increase in fees and charges to reflect the 7% pay award increase. Absolutely. So thank you for that. And thank you for your attendance, both of you this morning, and for the report and for answering questions. Thank you very much. The brutal, harsh reality is that the government's police funding settlement, West Midlands Police 2023 to 24, does not maintain the baseline funding that West Midlands Police needs to operate on a day-to-day basis to deliver an effective and efficient police service. And the government continues to support a police funding formula that costs West Midlands Police £40 million a year, the equivalent of 800 police officers. It continues to require the people of the West Midlands to pay more local council tax for less local policing. We received the fifth worst percentage 23-24 financial settlement in the country, faced £28 million of cuts in 23-24, and we'll be facing at least £28 million of cuts in 24-25. There's no levelling up when it comes to our police service in the West Midlands. The government's failing to get the basics right. It's entirely contrary to common sense. And despite the commitment and dedication of officers and staff, the government's failure to provide West Midlands Police with fair funding will continue to have a serious adverse impact on the ability of West Midlands Police to prevent, tackle and reduce crime. Agenda item 10 is Chief Constable's update, and this is an update on operational policing matters that can be discussed in the public domain. Over to you, Chief Constable.
In 3 minutes. Well, firstly, thank you for what you said at the beginning about Paul Freer. A really sad day for the force last week, and there's a lot of reflection going on. And it was the National Police Memorial event over the weekend, which I attended in Cardiff too, with some families of officers who have sadly been killed on duty over the years. So you've heard this morning around contact performance and some of the changes that have been going on there. I think that is very positive. There's a lot of effort going on behind the scenes to maintain and improve that level. But the 999 performance is certainly one to be very, very proud of. And the volume of 101s that are answered compared to what are abandoned, puts us in a very strong position. We just need to maintain that going forward. And I'm very pleased to have, created some more vacancies which have been filled for call handlers, because I think that's what was needed. Just in terms of staff as well, we've talked about the budget, etc. But we have signed off some further apprenticeships, particularly around IT in the last couple of weeks. So looking towards getting some young apprentices and also some graduate apprentices into the business. This is a bit more of growing your own in the police staff roles, and then obviously looking towards the sort of the graduated career progression in some of those areas. And that touches on some of the things we spoke right at the beginning of the meeting about with IT, penetration testing, IT skills, etc., etc. So I think that's pretty good news. Recruitment's open for police officers and PCSOs at the moment. All routes are open to us, which is positive, and that's going to continue. We've done some great investment at the moment at Tally Ho, so that's certainly helping us increase the number of officers and staff that are sort of trained through that facility. There's been some reporting about Operation Safeguard. We're currently running with 50 cells, and we've offered 20 extra as part of the national effort, which I've reported on previously. Firearms issues in the Met over the weekend. I've had a number of conversations with colleagues elsewhere. We've already been assisting the Metropolitan Police with a couple of jobs, and we share resources nationally on quite a regular basis. We have been very busy ourselves on firearms jobs with our firearms teams over the weekend in West Midlands on some proactive operations. So they're nicely running in the background, and there's no issue for West Midlands Police. The other couple of updates, just to reassure the public more than anything else, it's been a good week and month for building surveyors in terms of concrete condition surveys. Just pleased to report that we haven't got any of those issues, which again is another positive looking at that savings target for the next year. And two issues to finish off with. Firstly is to pick up on the custody side of things. Yes, we're running Operation Safeguard. Yes, we've opened another 2 custody suites. Yes, we've got a big piece of work ongoing with regards to HMIC inspection, but we've also, and this is good, having changed the policing model, we've virtually doubled our arrest rate. And in doubling the arrest rate, we've also managed to really improve the file quality rate and the stuff that goes to the CPS. So if you to compare us with the Metropolitan Police, they're running around 25, 26% sort of file quality. We are nearly at around the 60% mark. Now, that is very good for a force our size, but we are going to get better at that. And the last update, I just want to say is, because you've talked about laptops, is we managed to confirm the new Assistant Chief Constables in post as well since our last meeting. So 2 internal candidates, Matt Wellstead and Mike O'Hara, and there's 2 external candidates that I appointed as well. One is going into regional crime and CT, who's got a really strong background in that, and he's joining us from West Mercia Police, because Jane, our ACC, has got a deputy's job in Northumbria and is following Vanessa Jardine up north. And the 4th appointment is a lady who's coming from Staffordshire, who's got some decent experience, and she's going to be heading up crime. At the moment, she's head of public protection in Staffordshire Police. So our West Mercia colleague will be joining us very soon, and our Staffordshire colleague will be joining us probably just before Christmas. And obviously the other 2 are still in post. That's the update operationally, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Agenda item 11 is Strategic Policing Crime Board Work Plan, and this consists of the work plan and actions and future lines of inquiry, which are both simply for noting today. However, there are 4 outstanding actions, and if the responses are not received to these by the next board meeting, I'll be putting the actions direct to the Chief Constable at the next board meeting. Agenda item 12 is date for the next meeting, and that will be Tuesday, 24th of October 2023. I want to thank everyone who's attended today and contributed to this meeting of the Strategic Policing Crime Board. It's much appreciated. That completes the agenda for this meeting of the board, and I formally declare this board meeting closed. Thank you all very much.